Hi everyone, good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
Jenna rolled over on the sheet that gave off Austin's faint scent. Glancing at the clock on the wall, she shook her head. Hey, it was only through, still a long way from the end of the night shift. Outside the window, the entire city could be seen in the light of the street lamps. The nurse looked out, breathing in the humid night air mixed with the sweet scent of flowers from the tea and flower beds in the courtyard. It didn't take long for Jenna to sink into unhappy thoughts. A carousel of memories swirled around her in a whirlwind of events that had happened a few weeks ago. Back then, she'd been a doctor and proudly wore white coats. Jenna felt at ease in a world of accurate diagnoses and life-saving procedures, but she had no idea it could all change so drastically in an instant. "Jenna, where are you wandering off to?" came the voice of a nurse from the hallway. She immediately jumped up from her seat and rushed to the door, snapping out of her sad memories. "Yes, Patsy, I'm here," she replied, trying to hide the traces of worry on her face. Patsy, the head nurse, entered the room and looked around carefully. "So is everything in order?" "Yes, everything is calm," the nurse replied discreetly. Patsy nodded and went to another room. Frankly, Jenna was very uncomfortable working under her former subordinates. After all, she used to be a surgeon. One of those surgeons that patients would say was a doctor from God. That fateful day. Jenna was on the ward and she was on call at night. It had been a quiet shift. The patients were doing well and she felt that she was partly responsible for that. No, that didn't mean that there weren't any good surgeons in the department besides her. There were plenty. But Jenna's name was always on the list. Whether it was a coincidence or just her luck, all the surgeries she undertook were successful. David Williams, the chief of surgery, called her a magician or a fairy. In a way, he was right about the surgeries. Jenna was second to none. But on that fateful night, things didn't go the way they were supposed to. When it all started, when a patient was brought into the department after a car accident. The car, which was driven by this tipsy girl, skidded on the corner and he flew into the ditch. Her companion, a rich major, got off scot-free, but she earned herself a rather deep wound on her forearm. The ambulance staff expertly treated the wound and stopped the bleeding. It would seem that all that was left was to stitch the wound and administer appropriate drug therapy to prevent possible infections. However, the girl who had been admitted suddenly made a huge scandal, declaring publicly that she would not be treated by Jenna. At first, the nurse on duty wrote it off as alcoholic euphoria when a person is not quite aware of what is happening. But when Amber Smith started calling every possible authority, conflict erupted. She accused Jenna of everything she could think of, calling her a bribe taker and a careerist thing. "Look, what do you think you're doing? I am your doctor after all, and I insist that you need stitches immediately." Jenna tried to calm the raging patient down. But not only did that not calm Amber down, it made her even angrier, which led to more problems. Realizing that she couldn't let a patient who refused treatment go, Jenna decided to proceed at her own risk. She also knew that if Amber removed the bandage outside of the clinic, she could die from reopened bleeding. But, on the other hand, she couldn't force the treatment on her either. Faced with such a difficult dilemma, Jenna made what she felt was the only decision she could. She asked the nurse to administer a sedative and then proceeded with the surgery, which she performed masterfully. The stitching was neat, which was especially important for a young beauty. Jenna wiped the sweat from her forehead. "It's been a long time since I've had one of these," she exhaled in relief. Natalie, the operating room nurse, smiled. She couldn't remember a time when a patient had refused treatment, trying to insult their doctor in any way she could. The next morning, Jenna was in serious trouble. As soon as the head doctor, David Williams, opened his office, he immediately summoned the surgeon to his office, locking the door. David looked defiantly at Jenna. "Jenna, what do you think you're doing? What the hell did you do here last night? Why did you almost force a patient into surgery? Do you even know who her father is?" Jenna went pale. "No, I don't. Why should I know everyone who comes across my desk?" Chief of Medicine David Williams shook his palm at the air. "I'm the one still asking. Amber Smith, daughter of John Smith, a successful businessman and prominent philanthropist. Yeah, he's a household name. How could you not know that? Jenna pressed her lips together painfully. David, I don't understand what this is about. I was just doing my job, and I don't think I did anything wrong. What if that Amber had bled to death? One who would have taken responsibility. In fact, put yourself in my shoes. What would you have done? The doctor's answer seemed too harsh. David Williams was a former surgeon himself, and he knew the ins and outs of that difficult craft. Look, Jenna, I think you're forgetting that I'm the chief of surgery, and I get to decide how you do your job. And if I said Amber Smith shouldn't be touched, then I shouldn't have touched her. And now her father's going to sue. Says you caused his daughter cosmetic damage. They were planning on having surgery at a private clinic with an expensive plastic surgeon who would make the stitching invisible. This Amber is in a fashion show, considered one of the top models at the local agency. Jenna shook her head. I don't see what that has to do with me. I took an oath as a doctor. I'm supposed to follow instructions and everything. Besides, Amber didn't come in off the street. She was brought in by ambulance. I'm supposed to refuse to help a drunk girl. I'm sorry, but I didn't get her drunk. After her words, David Williams snorted oddly and then went to the window. For a few seconds, he stood silent, looking at the hospital yard, where the staff were already bustling about. Then he turned around and said, looking me straight in the eye, "There's a lot you don't seem to know, Jenna. Only your husband, Albert, was in the car with Amber Smith that night." Jenna went pale. What? What did you say, my husband? Realizing his subordinate's state of mind, the chief medical officer didn't pause for effect. Yes, he is, Jenna. He didn't need medical attention, so he fled the scene. Amber, on the other hand, was less fortunate and ended up in the hospital. I'd already spoken to the ER staff, and they confirmed that the bandage was secure and didn't need stitches at all. Jenna stood there not knowing what to say. But how could she let that drunk girl leave the ward when she could rip her bandage off at any moment and bleed to death under a fence somewhere? But that wasn't even the worst of it. It was the fact that her Albert had been dragged into such a sordid affair. She had already been hinted at his infidelity many times, but she had always defended her husband. I think it's all just speculation of envious people, and now it's all come out in this unpleasant way, she thought. Amster paused for a moment, then said, Well, here's the deal, Jenna. This Amber's father is furious. He's going to sue you for malpractice, and given how many people he knows in the right places, I think you're going to lose. So I suggest that you take it as it comes. What am I supposed to accept? Jenna asked wistfully. Was it my fault? David Williams looked angrily at his subordinate. Why isn't it? Who was supposed to keep an eye on her husband? Normal women don't walk away from normal women, So you didn't spend enough time with him, always thinking about work or something, so he went off on a bender. An embarrassed blush broke out on Jenna's cheeks. I think you're even willing to make excuses for him. But it was Albert who cheated, not me. But David Williams wrinkled his nose. I don't give a damn who cheated on who or with whom, but the fact remains. Your reputation, Jenna, now bears the greasy stain left by the hands of your frivolous husband. So if you want this case to go away, sit tight and listen to what you're told. You can forget about being a surgeon for a while. Maybe for a year or two, things will calm down, and I'll put you back on staff. But to keep you on staff, I'm offering you a nursing position. Jenna was momentarily speechless with surprise. Nurse. David Williams, are you out of your mind? I've spent all these years studying and interning for the lowest paying job in the world. Is this all the thanks I get for my help, for my dedication? The head doctor grinned. But you do not persist too much, he advised. Take my word for it, I know what I'm talking about. From this day on, no clinic will take you. Even the private ones will be notified of what's happened. You don't want to get in a fight with Amber Smith, especially over what's at stake. So I'll say it again, you either work as a nurse on our ward, or you quit. In which case, I'm not going to hire you back, so you can decide at home. You have 5 minutes to think about it. Jenna's eyes brimmed with tears. In an instant, everything turned upside down. What is this? Just like that, she could be vilified, dragged through the mud. Albert's good, too. You'd think he'd get mixed up with the daughter of a bigwig. What was he hoping for? What's there to think about? He's always had a thing for money and women's legs, Jenna thought to herself. At that moment, she imagined herself outside of surgery for the first time. But what would she be, a store clerk, with fingers as long as a pianist's? Or maybe she would go to a sewing shop and sew clothes. She didn't know the answer to that question. Of course, she realized that if she could work anywhere, it would be in the world of medicine. Perhaps she might even benefit from a little reprieve. But what was she talking about? What kind of a reprieve? She couldn't live without her job. After thinking for a moment, Jenna looked pleadingly at the head doctor. Can't I at least be a nurse? But how would I face the staff? David Williams chuckled understandingly. I know they would, and they'd be right. Next time, use your head. Amber Smith made it clear to you that you shouldn't touch her, but you gave her first aid. That's all. And now her father's got her in a mess that'll never be cleaned up. So there are no options for me, she asked in a shaky voice. The chief physician nodded silently, signaling that the conversation was over and the 5 minutes were over. Jenna agreed, though she'd berated herself for it many times afterward. She couldn't do anything else. Her parents were medical professionals, and from an early age, little Jenna had seen only the white coats of doctors, which seemed to her to be the best clothes in the world. As she walked out of the office, she couldn't hold back her tears. The nurses walked by, trying not to look at their crying coworker. This was the first time they had ever seen such a thing. After all, they associated Jenna with the image of a strong, strong-willed woman. But now she'd been broken, and it was not even Amber Smith, but her husband Albert, whose betrayal put a cross on the career of his wife. Of course, one could hope that in a year or two, David Williams would keep his word and give Jenna back her place in the department. But for a surgeon, 2 years out of practice is like death. A skill has to be honed daily, hourly, minute by minute. Because it's only when you go from being an ordinary, unremarkable doctor to being a real professional. Not a day went by that Jenna didn't think about her husband's betrayal and what it had led to. By then, they were already on the verge of divorce. They just didn't realize it. If Albert had said he wanted to end it, Jenna would have understood, wouldn't have made a scene. But Albert had gone the other way, the way of meanness and deceit. And now she had to pay for what had happened. Once again, right to sad thoughts, Jenna left the room and walked down the hospital corridor, illuminated by the light of a lamp. At this point, it felt like she was walking into the unknown. The corridor turned into an endless tunnel. Colleagues were sympathetic to the unenviable position of Jenna's former doctor and did not mock her. Everyone remembered her merits, hoping that someday things would change. But Amber Smith didn't appreciate that Jenna had saved her life. What's more, she slandered her savior on social media and local news. I mean, she's a veterinarian, at best capable of treating animals at the shelter. But what kind of doctor is she? In general, I don't understand how such specialists can work in medical institutions. Why don't they screen them out during their training? Amber told reporters while posing for the camera. Of course, everyone believed the patient. It's always the doctor's fault. They didn't see it coming. They didn't do it in time. But Jenna did the right thing that time. If she'd let Amber out of surgery that night, the rich man's daughter would have been interviewed at the local morgue. It was a severe neck wound involving blood vessels and muscles. Unfortunately, no one would listen to Jenna. Fearing the wrath of Amber's powerful father, the EMTs working that night changed the statement, claiming the wound was not dangerous. A month passed. Jenna had gotten used to her job as an EMT because it involved medicine, which Jenna was well versed in. At first, the doctors were shy about addressing the demoted woman, but then they stopped paying attention. In difficult cases, they even asked her for advice. Jenna was brought out of her reverie by the voice of head nurse Patsy. Jenna, please go check on the patient in room 7, but only quietly. Don't tell anyone. What's wrong there? Who did the surgery? Jenna asked in surprise. Patsy lowered her eyes. Valika Blanov. You know, the chief doctor's son-in-law. He's not much of a talent. He got your disgrace and took your place, and now he's basking in the glory. Jenna grimaced. She'd studied with Valera Blanov and knew he'd ended up in medicine by accident. It was unclear why, after training as a general physician, he had decided to become a surgeon. It was said that at first he chose another direction, but then he wanted to become a doctor-saver of lives. Valera's skills were mediocre. Realizing this, the head doctor gave him the simplest surgeries, trying to cover for his son-in-law. Jenna knew that in the 7th ward lay a prominent businessman, Peter Vinogradov, who had recently come to the department. Remembering the incident with Amber, the chief physician David Williams ordered to take the patient under special control. So Patsy, wanting to protect herself, asked Jenna to monitor his condition. Jenna, a former top surgeon, even demoted, could offer valuable advice. Entering Peter Vinogrado's room, Jenna checked his vital signs out of habit. Noticing he was awake, she asked a few questions. The businessman looked to be in his early 30s, though the mustache might have added to his age. Jenna knew that after his appendectomy, which had gone smoothly, Peter had been acting strangely, complaining of a worsening condition. The doctors had only thrown up their hands, unable to find a reason. Even the head doctor was powerless. All his vitals were normal, but the patient stubbornly refused to be discharged from the clinic. I think he liked it here. Most people are in a hurry to leave, and he is ready to be treated for a year, but we can't keep him here forever. I'm concerned about the commissions. Jenna had heard about Peter Grapevine's weirdness primarily from her nursing partner. She happened to be the one who had to clean the young businessman's room when he started to come to after anesthesia. What the businessman was whispering shocked the nurse to the core. Not knowing who to share this information with, she took advantage of the moment and told Jenna everything. She didn't take it seriously at first. Well, it's not like a person mumbles in a medically induced sleep. Often people talk a lot of nonsense that has nothing to do with reality. Except according to the nurse, Peter Grapevine was saying more than real things. Why did it surprise you so much? I never realized you were so impressionable, Jenna said with a smile. She remembered vividly the day the orderly had come to see her on the ward. How can I tell you, Jenna? But Jenna only shook her head. Oh, stop addressing me so formally. You and I are equals after all. You can just call me by my first name. I went in to see this grapevine to mop the floors and windows, and I heard him mumbling something, obviously coming out of anesthesia. And the words were so strange, not like those used by businessmen. He was saying something about a city dump, some river. Jenna smiled. Don't take it so hard. It doesn't matter what he was saying. People in that state tend to fantasize and often wishful thinking. The nurse looked at Jenna anxiously. She was sure something was wrong with Peter after all. Jenna felt that the businessman was not telling her the truth. He was acting strange. And then there's his constant complaining about how he's feeling. On top of that, it was disconcerting that Peter's relatives hadn't come to see him at all. Usually, it takes an important person to get to a medical institution, as in an hour his room is occupied by relatives who do not give passage to nurses, orderlies, and doctors. Some start threatening and bragging about their connections. Others take the path of least resistance, offering a bribe for good care, and others are even interested in how long the patient has left to live, as they hope to soon receive an inheritance. All in all, Jenna had seen it all. But it was the first time she'd encountered such indifference on the part of her family during Peter Grapevine's stay in the ward. Not a single person had come to see him. Doesn't he have co-workers, relatives, friends? It can't be, Jenna thought brokenly as she stood in Grapevine's room. The sound of her footsteps had woken the patient immediately. According to the nurse, he always slept very lightly, as if he were afraid of something. Jenna hadn't given it much thought at the time, realizing that things happened in life. Now looking into the businessman's eyes, Jenna started asking tricky questions about his health. Sometimes those questions overlapped with each other to eliminate the possibility of lying. It was like an interrogation, with the only difference being that it had to do with medicine. Grapevine answered warily, avoiding eye contact. And for a moment, it seemed to Jenna that the businessman was afraid of her. But what harm could she do to him when she'd been working as an orderly for a month now and wasn't allowed to perform surgeries? You know, I have a pain here and a pole here, and it hurts to turn around, Peter said with a grimace of misery on his face. She nodded sympathetically, knowing full well that the patient was probably suffering from postoperative pain, which was commonplace in such cases. For his part, the patient seemed eager to stay in the surgical ward for at least another week, if not two. At the same time, he looked cautiously toward the door and flinched every time it opened. After catching the patient mismatching a few questions, Jenna realized he was lying. Peter wasn't actually in pain. At least not in a way that would produce the appearance of a terminally ill person. All vital signs were normal. His labs were excellent. And the appendicitis removal surgery itself was considered quite easy and was not one of the more arcane surgical procedures. And also during the conversation with Jenna Grapevine did not even pay attention to the fact that she was no longer a doctor, but only a nurse. It seemed that the businessman did not understand the hierarchy at all, considering everyone who wore a hospital white coat to be a doctor. Of course, at first glance, there was nothing strange about it. But on the other hand, why would he lie so brazenly? Jenna talked to Peter for a bit longer and then walked out. She thought about not telling Patsy about it yet, about the patient, that it wasn't all that clear-cut. For a moment, she wanted to know the truth, the one that had made her patient carefully pretend to be a sick man preparing to go to the next world. Now, Jenna didn't think Galle's words about what Grapevine mumbled after coming out of anesthesia were strange. And really, why, being a businessman in a medicated delirium, had he never once mentioned anything from the world of business and big money? All those futures, management, leasing, not a single word. So, Jenna, everything okay in there? My Patsy, who wanted a break, inquired with a smile. Ridiculously, without a hitch. Jenna smiled. Yes, Patsy, I can state with complete confidence that the patient is on the mend. The head nurse frowned. On the mend? What's he complaining about then? Constant pain. He says he's been feeling worse the last few days. Jenna shrugged, saying that Peter was probably a very suspicious person who was used to looking for problems where there weren't. It wasn't long before the end of the shift when the nurse decided to look in on Grapevine again. For some inexplicable reason, she felt a burning desire to get to the truth. What was this mysterious man hiding, shuddering at every rustle and afraid of the sound of doors opening? Jenna had entered Peter's room half an hour before her shift ended because the businessman had been awake all night and the sun had beaten him after dawn. And it's not surprising, since that's when you want to sleep the most. Having had her moment, Jenna tiptoed into the room and approached his bed. Peter's eyes were closed and his chest was peacefully rising and falling. It was the way a heart beats. Jenna's hands trembled, sweat beading on her forehead. Why did you come here? What do you want to know? Don't you have enough problems already? An inner voice told her. The orderly stood for a moment longer and then approached the bed almost closely. She saw that the mattress was off to one side and wanted to fix it. When she saw a strange object peeking out from under the edge. At first, Jenna assumed it was a notebook or some kind of ID. But when she looked closer, she realized it was a passport. She was surprised beyond belief. Why hide such a document under a mattress? And in the ward? Maybe this Grapevine guy's not right in the head. Maybe it's a mental disorder like paranoia or delusions of persecution. Then everything would start to make sense. Bending down, Jenna gingerly touched the red book with her fingers, then pulled it out and held it in her hands. She felt like a pocket thief who'd snatched a passerby's wallet out of his pocket with a deft movement. Her hands burned, making it hard to concentrate on anything in particular. Trembling, Jenna carefully opened the passport and stunned. At that moment, it seemed to her that she had lost her mind and her consciousness was simply passing off fantasy as reality. The fact was that the passport really belonged to Peter Semyonovich Grapevine. Yes, but on the photo, there was a completely different person, not the one who was now lying in the ward. From surprise, she shuddered and took a couple of steps back. The passport was still in her hands. Frankly, Jenna didn't know why she'd picked it up, much less dared to open it. So what? He's an imposter. Jenna whispered. She didn't have an answer to that question at that moment. The door swung open noisily, and the young nurse tucked the document into the pocket of her lab coat. Standing on the threshold was Patsy. Jenna, what are you doing here? Aren't you going home? Shift change is already in full swing. So come on, follow me. My husband's coming over today. Do you want to ride home? No thanks, Patsy. I better walk. I still have to go to the store. Barely containing her excitement, she replied. The businessman woke up and looked at her in surprise. Jenna could tell from his eyes that he was afraid of something, deciding to keep the passport in her possession for the time being. Jenna turned in her shift and headed home. There was no one to talk to about it, though. Jenna had quickly divorced her husband after learning of his affair with Amber Smith. The woman had caused her a lot of problems afterward. Stepping outside, Jenna enjoyed exposing her face to the gentle sun. Her mood had improved noticeably. She smiled. There was nothing better than coming home after a night shift and knowing that she had a day off and a chance to get a good night's sleep with the peaceful sound of a fan or air conditioner. Just in her front yard, some guy was struggling with the leaves. Jenna smiled and waved at him. Andrew Matthew knew the surgeon's story well, so he sincerely sympathized with her. There were rumors that he himself had had something to do with medicine in the past, but no one could say for sure. Turning around, Jenna involuntarily looked up at the windows of the second floor, where her department was located. And that's when she saw something that made her wince. It was none other than Peter Grapevine staring out the window at her. A couple hours ago, he had complained of extreme weakness, unable to get out of bed. Jenna met the patient's gaze and felt embarrassed that she'd committed a theft a few minutes ago, albeit a small and insignificant one, but the point didn't change. Turning her back to the building, she crossed to the opposite side of the street. Got to do some thinking. She decided to stop at the store for bread and milk. The smell of fresh baked goods wafting through the air was instantly energizing. After all, what could be better than warm bread with a glass of milk? Quickly choosing everything she needed, she went to the cash register. At that moment, as if out of the blue, there was a sharp shout and a man's voice. She turned around. A couple of meters away from her stood a sturdy guard about 40 years old with a red face, who was holding the hand of a frightened girl. The little girl's clothes were dirty and her little hands were trembling with excitement and fear. There, caught the thief. The guard announced loudly, showing everyone present a small candy bar lying on the counter. The girl shifted nervously from foot to foot, trying to look away. In her eyes, Jenna read not only guilt but deep hopelessness. So what do we do next? Do we take her to the detention room or what? The guard asked, reveling in his own power. The little girl shrugged her shoulders mutely, signaling that she didn't care what happened next. Jenna's heart clenched with an internal spasm. I'm sorry, but you have no right to treat her like that. It's a child, she stated firmly. The guard snorted contemptuously. Who the hell are you to lecture me? Jenna's cheeks flared with indignation. Who am I? I'm a doctor-surgeon, and now an orderly working on the ward. I hope that's enough. After Jenna's words, the guard visibly subsided. Meanwhile, she continued, if it's all about that ill-fated candy bar, I'll pay for it out of my own pocket. Will that satisfy you? The guard shook his head and then stepped aside, letting go. That'll do. Just through the register. Jenna smiled and, after paying for her purchases, bought a few candy bars for the girl. As she headed for the exit, the little girl obediently followed her without taking her eyes off her. Jenna walked out of the store and approached the girl. What's your name? Annie, the girl replied. That's a good name. And I'm Jenna. Nice to meet you. You must be hungry. Annie hesitated for a moment, then looked guiltily at her savior. Yeah, hungry. Only I don't have any money to buy food. Jenna looked around and saw a nearby unremarkable, cozy cafe just off the road. But that's okay, we'll get a bite to eat over there now. Taking the little girl across the street, she sat her down at a table, ordered juice and the freshest pastries she could find. Then Yuta ate with great gusto. Jenna looked at her and thought how small, fragile, defenseless she was. And how could this little girl have ended up on the streets? Jenna waited patiently until Annie was full and asked her to tell her about herself. The girl frowned, as if considering whether or not to tell her aunt the truth. But then she admitted that she lived with her mother in a small town. Daddy had left the family when Annie was a baby. Mom worked 2 jobs to feed her daughter and pay for a rented apartment. But when Catherine Andrews became seriously ill, Annie took care of her for about a month. Annie ended up on the streets when her mom died. The girl met other children with a difficult fate. The kids lived in an abandoned house and earned a living as they could. Someone helped in the kitchen at the cafe. Someone sold flowers in the underpass. Annie couldn't work because of her small age. She was afraid that social workers would find her and send her to an orphanage. Annie didn't want to leave her friends. Jenna listened to her, holding back tears. She realized that Annie was a strong girl. She was only 10 years old, but she'd already seen a lot. Look, I can't make any promises, but I'll try to help you and your friends. How many of you live in this house? Jenna asked. 4. Me, Bobby, Katie, and Andrew, said Annie. Jenna nodded. She realized that the girl needed her help. They sat in the cafe for about an hour and then headed for the exit. Jenna saw an A for a missing man. The police or relatives of missing people post such notices in public places. When she saw the man's photo, she felt uneasy. The man in the photo was the same Peter Grapevine whose picture she'd seen on the passport she'd found on the patient. Her hands trembled with excitement. It turned out that all this time they had been treating and hiding a criminal, and the real Peter Grapevine was missing. Perhaps there had been a crime. Thoughts swarmed in Jenna's head. She pulled her passport out of her purse and compared the photo to the ID. It was correct Peter Grapevine, 32, missing after a fishing trip. Who were they treating then? And what was the name of the imposter who was claiming to be Peter Grapevine? Ah, Jenna gasped. There were so many questions that she'd stayed up all night. The last thing she'd expected was for a simple trip to the store to turn into such an immediate problem. Annie's story had touched her to the core. How could she abandon her child without support? In fact, it's still a child, forced to live on the streets. What if something happened to her? Jenna wouldn't be able to look people in the eye. All her life, she's been saving people who needed help, performing complex surgeries, pulling patients through. But this doesn't need surgery. It just needs involvement and help. Listen, why don't you stay with me for a while, and then we'll figure out what to do. Just tell the guys not to come looking for you, Jenna suggested. And he looked at her longing. I don't mind, but I can't leave them. They're waiting for me. When I was sick, Andrew would run to get medicine and buy hot tea. That we gathered all the kids at once. So what if there are 4 of them? She lives alone in a 2-bedroom apartment. There's plenty of room. Listen, let's invite your friends over to my place. Don't worry, I won't turn them into social services. I promise peace, comfort, and good food. There's also a TV and lots of books to read, she said. And smile. And picture books. Jenna looked tenderly at the little girl. Of course, there are some for adults. Okay, I agree, Annie said maturely, and took Jenna's hand. Jenna asked to see the house where they lived. She followed the girl, thinking about how just a few minutes ago her visit to the store had turned into an unpredictable adventure. The house where Annie lived with her friends exuded sadness and sorrow. Leftover plaster, broken window panes, and overgrown front door presented a pitiful sight. There was no telling what awaited them next. Jenna stopped in front of the bushes, wondering how to get inside. It immediately pointed her to an unpleasant door. Inside it was dark, dusty, and smelled damp. In one of the rooms sat 3 kids. One of them, a boy of about 12 years old, quickly jumped to his feet and cheered. Are you back? She replied with a sweet smile. Yes. And this is my new friend, Aunt Jenna. She saved me after the girl's words. Tears glistened in the nurse's eyes. Oh, I see. And I'm Bobby, answered the boy, looking respectfully at the guest. This is Kate. Jenna said hello to each of them by the hand. My heart ached. After all, these little ones had been deprived of the most important things, family, home, and parental love. She felt that the children needed help, and there was no one else to help them but her. Jenna didn't hesitate long and immediately voiced her suggestion out loud. The children were hesitant at first, but when she convinced them that Aunt Jenna was very kind, they agreed. The kids loved the apartment. In fact, it was their first normal, cozy place to live in many years. Lanes had beds, tables, chairs, closets, carpet on the floor, curtains on the windows. Deep down, Jenna didn't regret a single thing. After all, she received far more from the children than she gave. While still working as a surgeon, she'd realized that true happiness wasn't about material goods, but about love and care and understanding. I'll make dinner. Jenna mentally pledged to herself that she would help the children build a new life. Not the one they had on the streets, but a real one where they would be loved, cherished, and nurtured. Leaving the children in the hall, she remembered the passport she had found in the clinic. After thinking for a while, the nurse decided to call the police. Of course, at first she wanted to go to the head doctor, but remembering their last conversation about the Ambersmith case, she realized she didn't want to do that at all. The desk clerk didn't know what she was talking about at first, but when he heard Grapevine's name, he perked up and sent a team to Jenna's address to talk to her. As she waited for the police to arrive, she realized that maybe she should have talked to the patient pretending to be Grapevine first. But on the other hand, he could be a criminal lying through his teeth. The police were shocked to see Jenna holding a passport with the wanted man's picture on it. As soon as they found out where the young nurse had found him, their surprise knew no bounds. Immediately, a team was dispatched to the surgical department of the local hospital to apprehend the imposter. Unfortunately, when they burst into the ward, there was no one there. Patsy was only guiltily throwing up her hands, saying that the patient had gone outside to get some air for just a minute and then disappeared. Jenna and the nursing staff immediately made a sketch of the wanted criminal. In fact, Jenna had strong doubts that the man who had been operated on was a murderer capable of taking another man's life. Still, in conversation, the patient who had introduced himself as Peter had been quite polite and calm. Several days passed. The search still yielded no results. All the while, Annie, Katty, and Andrew were living at Jenna's house. The neighbors looked at the young nurse with obvious disapproval, grumbling something about her harboring homeless people. But Jenna ignored them, knowing she was doing the right thing. After all, she was helping the kids the others had turned their backs on. And then suddenly she remembered the words of her colleague, who said that in his delirium the patient said that in the dump of Erica. Deciding that this could help the search, she came to the police the same day and supplemented the testimony. That way, law enforcement was able to expand the search to include homeless and formerly incarcerated suspects in the manhunt. That's where success awaited them. On the third day after the raid on the city dump, the vagrant Victor Istman, who pretended to be Peter Grapevine, was detained. Naturally, the young man was immediately accused of attempting to assassinate the businessman and attempting to misappropriate someone else's name. But law enforcers had no idea what other surprise awaited them. The fact was that Victor had not attempted on the life of the wanted Peter at all. Not only that, Vitia witnessed the scene when Peter Grapevine pushed his car into the cliff and accidentally dropped his passport on the shore. Saying that he was being followed by a vagrant, the stranger rushed in pursuit, wanting to remove the witness. The homeless man didn't immediately realize what was going on. When Jenna realized what had happened, she felt uneasy. The fact was that Peter Grapevine had decided to fake his death to hide from creditors and start a new life with his mistress. Hence, everyone believed in his disappearance, except Victor Istman himself, who decided to keep the passport he had found just in case. Of course, it was a big mistake on his part. But who among us doesn't make a mistake when it all happens under such ridiculous and quick circumstances? At first, the police didn't take the vagrant's testimony seriously. I don't know what the homeless guy was talking about. After all, in fact, he could and lie, having invented a convoluted story about a fugitive businessman who buried himself in Epsom. But in the course of the investigation, the police came up pretty quickly on the mistress of the fugitive Peter. That's when it was Jenna's turn to be surprised. It turned out that the fugitive businessman's mistress was none other than Amber Smith, who had once stolen her husband away from her while cohabiting with two men. Amber masterfully fooled them, enjoying her own greatness in the back of her mind. Jenna wasn't really surprised by what happened, because she'd expected nothing less from the slutty girl. But still, the biggest surprise was ahead of her. When Amber was called in for questioning, she acted defiantly, brazenly saying that she wasn't going to publicize the details of her private life and had the right to remain silent. But after an hour of interrogation, she suddenly burst into tears and covered her face with her hands. To calm her down, they even had to call a doctor and give her a sedative. It turns out that when Peter Grapevine decided to run away with his mistress, he did not even suspect that she has an admirer on the side. And that admirer was none other than Albert, who after his divorce from his wife switched to rich ladies, thus formed a kind of love triangle in which Amber found herself. It remains only to guess how she managed to live such a life, hiding lovers from each other. Unfortunately, at one point it came to light and Jenna's ex-husband's jealousy kicked in. The confrontation took place at the country cabin where Amber wanted to meet the fugitive Peter. Yeah, except Albert followed her and caught her in the arms of another man. Albert just wanted to talk, but Peter wasn't about to discuss the details of his affair with Amber and threw himself into the fray. In the heat of the fight, the two hapless lovers themselves didn't notice how they ended up on the street. That's it. "Got you, you bastard," read Alberta, realizing he was losing to a stronger opponent. Peter Grapevine decided to flee. Albert rushed after, trailing his opponent by only a few steps. Unfortunately, Peter didn't realize that there was a swamp. He realized too late that he had fallen into a shaky quagmire. "So suck it up. Amber is mine and no one else's," Albert thundered. For a while, he just stared at Peter, reveling in the sight of his own power, and then he tossed his rival a broken stick and pulled him to safety. From then on, Albert and Peter became brothers-in-law, in love with the same woman. It's hard to even imagine how they managed to live side by side and not make any claims against each other. It was all very unnerving and infuriating for Amber. Every time she was afraid that someday the lovers would fight and kill each other. Thanks to her testimony, Peter Grapevine was apprehended. He was charged with fraud. After all, before he disappeared from his family's life forever, he stole the firm's money and took out a loan in his wife's name. Now he won't be needing that money anymore. Jenna didn't find out until a few days later when the chain of investigation reached out to the head doctor of the clinic. He was connected to Amber Smith's father. The tangle unraveled more and more slowly, adding more and more people to the case. Soon David Williams was ousted, and a new, fair, and honest head doctor took his place. At first, Jenna thought nothing would change for her. When she was brought back on staff, she realized she could save people now, just as she had before. She was over the moon when she got the job as head of the department. After all, she didn't have to wait several years for Amber's father's anger to subside, but it wasn't even that pleased Jenna the most. It was the fact that she was able to get the board of trustees to rule in her favor. Jenna, a successful surgeon, decided to take custody of Katie, Bobby, and Andrew. They were not related, but after Jenna gained custody of them, the children became one family. A year later, Jenna's life changed. She was once again recognized in the medical community and felt the happiness of being a mother of many children. Jenna didn't expect her children to change her life so dramatically. Now, after work, she would rush home with a smile. Colleagues marveled at how wonderful motherhood was. Jenna took the kids to the park, paid for rides, and spoiled them with candy. By the beginning of the school year, all the kids were in school and doing well. No wonder, because before, living on the street, they could not study. "You are my sunshine," Jenna said with a smile. "You should still find a good man," Galena, a co-worker, remarked. After all they had been through together, Jenna considered her a friend and often asked her to watch the kids. Soon there was a new orderly on their ward. At first, no one could remember where they had seen him before. Only Jenna recognized him as the drifter who had found someone else's passport and pretended to be a missing businessman to get medical care and shelter. Jenna didn't condemn Victor Eastman for this act. Perhaps it was a fateful set of circumstances that drove him. Later repented and decided to change his life. He got a job as an orderly at the hospital where he had once been helped. From the first days, Victor proved himself to be a good worker. Jenna did not pay attention to him at first, but one day he helped her walk home when her heel broke. From that incident, the romance between Jenna and Victor began. Then their romance flared brightly. "Now it's time to think about getting married," Galena joked, not realizing that Victor had already thought about it. 3 months later, Jenna and Victor had a daring wedding, surprising everyone. But Jenna was more pleased that her children shouted bitter, happy that they had a loving father. Anthony stopped paying due attention to his wife a long time ago. He looked more and more at other women and girls, allowing himself to sit with the men over beer. What can I say? The man was all like his grandfather and father, former immigrants from a distant village who lived in fishing and hunting. And even after moving to the city and marrying a city girl, Anthony did not give up his habits. This, of course, always infuriated Barbara. What can I do? She complained to her only friend and neighbor Sophie, an old teacher and Jewish woman, who it is unknown how she ended up in this city, and on what means she lived is unclear. But why do you think so? You are a smart, intelligent woman, a primary school teacher. And you say that. Don't I understand? It is you, Sophie, who have children and grandchildren who will stand up for you. On the other hand, who will stand up for me. Understand I'm an orphan, and thanks for that I was able to learn with my own head. And if Anthony chases me, then where should I go? To the old room? You're just afraid of difficulties. That's understandable, but then see for yourself. Anthony is a bore and an ignoramus. Ill-mannered, but on the other hand, they are all like that. Was it really possible that your late husband cheated? Barbara looked at her neighbor in surprise. I thought mine wasn't walking when I was carrying our first and second babies under my heart. I was walking. Just remember, Barbara, some walk wisely, while others, like yours, put it on display for everyone to see. Sophie, does everyone really know now that he has a mistress? The neighbor smiled sadly, looked at poor Barbara, and stroked her hand. Barbara, just come to terms with it, and think about how you can give birth to a baby. How long have you been together? In a few years. But it just doesn't work out. Yes, I haven't tried anything. I went to see doctors and sorcerers. but everything doesn't work out. The doctor says that the problem may be in the husband himself. Well, how do you find out? You can't ask him this directly. Knowing your husband's tough temper, I dare to assume that such a conversation will end in good hassle. Well, on the other hand, how to check? You really can't give him a mistress. If she got pregnant, that means the reason is you. At least on the other hand, he may leave for her if his mistress carries a child from him. And men are so unpredictable. No, Anthony won't leave. His father won't let him. Are you sure about this, Barbara? The woman nodded her head affirmatively, wiping away accumulated tears with a handkerchief. She had confidence in her father-in-law. It was he who found Barbara for his son, introduced him, and forced him to marry when he found out that they were dating and even intended to live together. Then he threatened his son that, if he divorced Barbara, he would not see the inheritance of his own ears. And there was a considerable inheritance there, as the woman herself believed. Well, what if your mistress gets pregnant? What happens? He won't abandon his child, his dear one. He won't abandon him. He will pay child support. And then, if anything happens, he will arrange guardianship. He is such a... Especially if there is an heir, he will break anyone's head for him. And the mistress will not agree to blackmail. My hand is strong, and if anything happens, it can burn you. Yes, he's a tough guy. Okay, see for yourself, but by the way, I have a couple of friends here. They went to visit a knowledgeable grandmother. If anything, I ask her address. Thank you, Sophie, you will always listen to me and console me. Nothing, neighbor. What can you do? This is our lot. If you need anything, get back to me. The neighbor left, and Barbara sat for a long time at the kitchen table in the empty 3-room apartment that Anthony's parents gave them for their wedding. And I thought and thought and thought and thought and couldn't come up with anything worthwhile. She understood that her husband was walking, and there was strong evidence for this. What can I do? Is it true? Shouldn't we put Flyagorix in his borscht so that he doesn't go for a walk? But the woman did not know how far her relationship with the beauty went, who came to their city to work as an agronomist and part-time accountant at a large woodworking enterprise. It was there that her husband worked as a mechanic, and she worked as a primary school teacher. How good you are today. Look what I brought you. And Anthony handed the woman a luxurious necklace made of natural pearls of dark blue, almost black color. Oh, Anthony, where did you get such beauty from? And what will your wife say to all this? What will she say? Nothing. I bought the same one for her too. So there's nothing to be offended by. But if you don't love her, then why are you still with her? The woman cunningly tried to find out what was going on in his house. My grandfather is on Barbara's side, and he said that if I divorced, I would be disinherited. And there, believe me, there is something to fight for. Come on, you're agile and young. Arms and legs, like everything else, are there. You can earn money on the spot. And with a laugh, she grabbed him by the place of origin. Jadwiga didn't want to miss out on Anthony. What if the wife finds out about us? The accountant gently wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed his chin. Nothing will happen, he will cry, that's all. Anthony was sure that this would happen. Even if we come to your house together? Jadwiga specifically emphasized the word your home while observing the reaction. Yours. Jadwiga, what are you talking about? What are you trying to achieve? When we started dating, we discussed this point. Don't touch your wife, you and I live separately. And she waits for me at home and cooks soups for me. Well, at least invite me to dinner? Or didn't I even earn that? Anthony, with a dissatisfied look, threw her hands off his shoulders and pulled away. He was already starting to get tired of this conversation. Okay, that's it. I have to go. Lunch was almost over, and I still hadn't had lunch. At the mere mention of homemade soup, Anthony felt a queasy feeling in his stomach and an urgent growl in his stomach. His Barbara's soup was always rich and delicious. Even my mother had never cooked something so delicious. So that means you don't love me? Jadwiga wailed in her polish and turned theatrically to the window, covering her face with her hands. Don't cry. I'll be back soon. In the meantime, it's time to work. Anthony quickly left the accountant's office and met his father nose to nose on the threshold. Dad, what are you doing here? His surprise knew no bounds. Yes, I decided to check on you, son. Your mother went home with Barbara to visit you. And I'm here, and I see that you've found yourself a new mistress." The man nodded at the sign hanging on the door of the accountant's office, Jadwiga Volchek. He looked at his son reproachfully, trying not to give him a ringing slap in the face. After all, this is not how he and his mother raised him. Oh, not like that. Bruno, although he came from the outback and had considerable health and masculine strength, never cheated on his wife. Yes, in my youth I had no hobbies, but when I got married I completely swore off cheating. But the son apparently didn't follow suit. He doesn't want to settle down. "What are you talking about, Dad? I found out about salaries and bonuses. Do you really think everything is the worst?" "Oh, there's no need to tell me fairy tales. You reek of women's perfume a kilometer away." He shook his finger at him. Bruno wanted to say that he would sign over all his property to Barbara, but he lost his tongue just in time. It was not worth it to set up a woman like this ahead of time. Otherwise, you never know what would hit his fool in the head. "Dad, for Barbara I'll rip out anyone's throat, and she's my wife before people and God." "Okay, at least you understand this." "Okay, let's go home. I asked the director for you. My mother and I have a conversation with you." Anthony nodded and obediently followed his father. And Jadwiga stood under the door and heard it all perfectly. No, she didn't eavesdrop. It was just that the men spoke so loudly, openly, that everything could be heard perfectly behind the flimsy door. What now? All I can do is enjoy his caresses. He will never leave her, and a stingy tear rolled down her pretty face. Yes, what can I say? The woman was simply catastrophically unlucky. She didn't find a husband in her homeland, couldn't start a relationship, and there were only potential candidates for lovers. And so that someone would take them and ask them to marry. They simply weren't there. All the men passed by. Sometimes they stayed in her life longer, sometimes just for the night. Others spoke about her beauty, others about a woman's intelligence. Well, what does it matter to her? No family, no child, nothing. Jadwiga increasingly began to think about not just marrying Anthony, but having a baby with him. She knew from her lover that they had no children, but this family apparently had amassed enormous wealth. And maybe it's true. Follow your grandmother's advice and give birth to a boy or girl. Let it be a joy. "Grandma, but how can I give birth? I've already tried and can't get pregnant." "Maybe you can tell me what. And your boyfriend, does he have children? Or maybe infertile? This is important, granddaughter." "Yes, it seems like he and his wife have no children. But on the side he said that there was a boy and a girl. And she might be lying." "He's not lying," said the grandmother, laying out the cards on the table and looking at Anthony's fate. "You know, my girl, I'll tell you one thing, that you shouldn't be together. But if you are thinking of giving birth to him, give birth. The baby will be nice, and his destiny will be wonderful." "Granny, are you sure about this?" Jadwiga looked carefully at the old woman who was smoking a pipe and looked at her granddaughter with a smile. "Don't doubt it, I definitely see it. And my cards don't lie. The heredity there is good, and his relatives are rich. If they like their grandson, consider that a well-fed life is guaranteed for you." Jadwiga thought for a minute and began to finger her ancient rosary, mentally calculating each option. But then the grandmother took her word. "Don't doubt it, you'll get more than you do now. The main thing is to conceive this child on your Anthony's marital bed in his home." "Grandma, well, this is already. Don't think about it, do as I say, and everything will be good for you. Now go, I need to rest. Come tomorrow, I'll give you the collection. Just add it to your little man's food, and that's it. Consider it done." Oh God, thought Jadwiga, sitting behind the wheel of her car and heading towards the city. And why did she manage to go to her grandmother in the village for advice? Well, what can she advise? Herbs, rituals. Yes, in our age of technology and numbers, even though the very thought of the family's wealth haunted her. Maybe it's really worth thinking about the grandmother's words and not giving up on her plan? The woman turned the key in the ignition and pressed the gas pedal. The car let out a loud animal roar and took off, leaving behind a cloud of dust. Barbara had been studying with her students since the very morning. The woman was happy when she gave all of herself to the children, and they pleased her not only with good grades but also with their attention and love. But even today, Barbara more and more often returned her thoughts to yesterday's event, the arrival of Anthony's parents. They arrived and brought a bunch of gifts and local delicacies, but it was Anthony's mother who started the conversation with her, which alarmed and impressed this woman. Yes, it's understandable old people always wanted grandchildren, but she and her husband live for so long and nothing comes of it. This frightened her at first, then made her despondent, but now Barbara has simply resigned herself to it. They gave me an address here, and I strongly advise you to go to it. The woman handed her a piece of paper on which the address of one village was written in beautiful handwriting. Wow. Judging by the name, it is somewhere on the border with Romania or Poland. Barbara.
Yes. Did you understand everything correctly? This is the address of a healer. And by the way, she helped many of my friends. Because Barbara, my advice to you, if you want kids, go to her. If not, then I'm sorry. I tried to do the best, otherwise, God forbid, he will find a woman on the side and make her a child. And what's next?
Barbara was sitting on a chair, crumpling a napkin in her hand and nervously biting her lips. She understood perfectly well how right her mother-in-law was, and if no measures are taken, the husband may simply leave. But you are an educated woman. How can you believe in all these superstitions? These superstitions, as you say, my dear, have helped me more than once to return my husband to the family, to give birth to a son, and to do many other things with the help of the most ordinary herbs and words. Don't underestimate this power. And what do you have to lose? Nothing at all, Barbara thought to herself, wiped away her tears and looked carefully at the piece of paper. And I'll tell Anthony that you'll come to rest with me. So don't worry about my son. Barbara mentally nodded her head and agreed. In the evening, lying in bed, she returned to this conversation over and over again. Anthony did not come home, and since his parents arrived, he spends the night in the garage. To all the questions why, he answered sharply that he did not intend to listen to his parents' moral teachings, so he would simply live in the garage. It's good that at least I come home for dinner, and you cook your own signature soup. Barbara smiled and nodded her head to her husband, because she knew perfectly well that he simply adores her signature dish and cannot live without it. He even once jokingly said that if they separated, he would definitely come to her for dinner. Anthony, what makes you think that I will have a new husband? Do I need you and only you? Yes, that's me, by the way. This was at the very beginning of their relationship. But now the issue with the children has become so urgent that even her signature dish is not able to save the rapidly sinking marriage. Okay, maybe it's good, but the face is not at home. It will be possible to pay attention to his parents and calmly think about the words of his mother-in-law, in whose person she found an assistant. Yeah, what if he really took a mistress? And the garage is just a go-ahead. Barbara turned over on her side and then simply got out of bed and began to walk around the room. She was truly tormented by doubts, but what could she do? She was distracted from her sad thoughts by a quiet knock on the door. Barbara, aren't you sleeping? The mother-in-law's voice was quiet so as not to wake up her already sleeping husband. No, Mary, come in. I heard you spinning around from the next room. And now you are pacing the room. Are you still thinking about my words or whether Anthony has found someone else? Both. It's all somehow intertwined into a ball. And to be honest, I can't figure it out. Everything is going so smoothly with you and your husband. Hey, no, honey, now we've gotten used to each other. And in his youth, my Nicholas was very wayward and violent. Do you know what guys from the outback are like in this regard? Jealous and free at the same time. Do not, you know. Maybe even good. Anthony is ours, one might say almost urban. Not too rowdy. But according to your Nicholas, you wouldn't say that he is so violent. Oh, take my word for it. If you looked at the wrong person, you'll get a slap in the face. The dress was shorter than it was supposed to be. It could have been pulled by the hair. Not to mention wearing makeup to work, especially to the store. It even got to the point that one day he cut my hair. Imagine. Are you kidding? Barbara listened and couldn't believe it all. It was so. A friend invited me to her wedding, and Nicholas was in town then. Imagine someone told him that your wife not only came to the wedding in a new dress, but also braided her hair with ribbons. So he flew in like crazy, grabbed a sickle and cut off my braid with ribbons right at the back of my head. I then roared over my braid, and it was a noble one, as thick as my arm. I raised her from a very young age. I hope Anthony won't be like that. Don't worry about it. By the way, my grandmother also helped people, which is why she helped pacify my Nicholas's temper and give birth to Anthony. Don't look. I didn't immediately carry a little one under my heart. probably in the 5th year of marriage. And now I want to help you too. But why? Why do you need this? Then, for my Anthony, I want the best wife and daughter-in-law. And that's who you are. After all, you never know what kind of bitch would covet her husband as much as our wealth. Believe me, I've seen more than one of these. But this is so lyrics and romances. Now, don't think. Better put on your robe and let's go to the kitchen to drink tea. I brought one wonderful collection. It will help improve your sleep and calm your nerves. 2 women were sitting in the kitchen by candlelight and drinking tea. They chatted like old friends. And who would have thought that mother-in-law and daughter-in-law could get along so well? Nobody. The next day, early in the morning, Mary dialed her son and, in the tone of a gallant commander, clearly said, "Anthony, are you coming home for breakfast?" Apparently, the son said that he had already had breakfast. That's why she immediately posed the next question. "By the way, I need Barbara. And I'm temporarily taking her from your family nest. I hope not for long. Don't worry, son, you won't be left an orphan without food. I want to send the girl to a resort for a couple of days to relax." Well, with your commanding tone, how can anyone argue with you? Take it. And let Barbara rest as much as she wants. That's what we decided on. Well, Barbara, now you are free like a bird for a few days, or even a week. By the way, if necessary, I will help you apply for sick leave at work. Yes, in principle, it's not worth it. We have summer and holidays. True, first graders sometimes attend after-school classes, but due to the accumulated weekends and days off, I can find time during the week. But what will I tell her? I have never communicated with such people. Nothing. You just come to her, and then she will do everything herself. There are rumors about her that the old woman sees everything. Barbara took a sip of aromatic tea and looked carefully at her mother-in-law, trying to understand and accept everything she was saying. Don't worry, you'll find her right away. Within a few days, Barbara packed a small bag and called a taxi that took her to the station. Standing on the platform, she kept thinking, is she doing the right thing? Yes, maybe it's true Mary. It's better to do it and regret it than not to do it, and rack your brains over the missed chance. Yes, don't doubt it, you're doing everything right. The young voice of a handsome boy sounded right next to her ear, and Barbara jerked in surprise. Sorry if I scared you. Do you need help with things? Yes, I would be grateful. Are you in this carriage? Yes, 13th place. Wow, a damn dozen. But you are coming with us, dear lady, and our cheerful company will entertain you all the way, if you don't mind. Yes, of course, I don't mind. Give me your bag. And the guy helped her bring her things to her place and sat her down when the cheerful company of young guys began to take their places. Barbara looked carefully at the cheerful guys who were apparently going on a camping trip. You are probably going on a hike? Barbara carefully inserted her word into the conversation of the young people. Well, how can I say a hike? We 5th-year students are studying the culture of one fascinating region on the border of 3 cultures. And so we go to the village. We will collect local stories, ethnic groups, songs, as they say, the culture of the local indigenous population, and the 3 nationalities living in this region. Or rather, within the framework of one very interesting village for us. How amazing. This means that God himself sent you to me. I am also going to this village. At that moment, the conductor looked into their compartment and sweetly asked if they needed a bed and whether they should serve tea. Yes, dear girl, said Barbara. Serve it. In the meantime, in return, I treated you to a pie from my grandmother. Oh, thank you. This will be for dinner. And by the way, as you understand it, you are traveling in compartments for everyone? We arrive in the morning, almost before dawn. Don't worry, I'll wake you up. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll bring bed linen and tea later. The conductor left, and the company continued to settle down in its places. Yes, God sent me these young people. It will be fun to ride. And if anything happens, they will show you what and where on the spot. But how to start an interrupted conversation, Barbara thought. But then the young man himself took the conversation in the right direction. What is your name? Here I am, Oleg. And you, as I understand it, are going with us to the same village. I am Barbara, as the Georgian queen, and apparently I am going with you. Affairs? Yes, there is one thing. I think you will also find it interesting. Wow. We are directly pursued by success all the way to this region, Oleg said confidently, and he sat down more comfortably, preparing to listen. Apparently you have something to tell us. Yes, they told me that there is in this village, somewhere even on its outskirts, an old woman who seems to be a healer, herbalist and witch all rolled into one. Young people, I just ask you not to laugh, but I need to get to her. Wow. It's as if God himself sent you to us. Can we go to her with you? It's true, we are interested in everything. But if you don't mind. Yes, I don't mind. On the contrary, the support of young people is important to me. I really hope you won't laugh at me. That like this. An older woman believes in all this nonsense. No, we won't laugh, the girl said and extended her hand in greeting. My name is Helga. Can you tell me what problem you are coming to her with, if it's not a secret? Barbara closed her eyes for a minute and wondered whether it was worth exposing her own grief and problems to people's rumors. But at that second it burst through her. What can I say? After all, each of us has had moments when we want to talk about everything to a stranger, to shift our problems at least for a minute. Yes, you understand, young people. Maybe I'm wrong myself. Maybe it just happened this way, but my husband and I haven't been able to have a child for a year now. They seem to be healthy, they underwent examinations, but nature does not give us a chance to become parents. Maybe the problem is me. After all, my husband has a child on his side. But that's what they say, and I'm barren. My mother-in-law treats me as if she were her own daughter, but not at all. I'm afraid that my husband will leave for someone else, and she will give birth to a child, and I will remain out of work. Yes, and I intuitively feel that he has a mistress. I don't know how serious it is. The company of young people listened and remained silent, because everyone understood her grief and sadness, and then Alex tried to somehow cheer everyone up. And here you will check how much the old woman is a master of her craft. But by the way, our curator, historian Pablo, spoke about an old woman living in this village. Maybe this is her. This will be great. Sure, the topic of my fortune-telling. And he cheerfully raised his hand, and his idea was immediately picked up by the girl Helga. Then the topic of ancient rituals for pregnancy is mine. This, by the way, is very interesting, and as far as I know, no one has written it yet. So my work will be unique and inimitable. There is nothing unique. After all, this is all well-forgotten old stuff, said a guy with a thin beard that made him look like a deacon from the local parish from the top shelf. Barbara listened to them and smiled. After all, how good it was to travel in the company of such young people, ready to help and support in the most unusual decision. It was fun to ride. Evening imperceptibly turned to night, and the company, slowly settling into place, began to prepare for bed. The only one who could not sleep was Barbara, who was lying and looking at the shelf. I thought about the old woman, about her relationship with her husband, and about what would happen next. And Anthony at these moments was hugging the other one with all his might, giving her caresses and kisses. The woman carefully pulled her lover away from her and looked into his eyes. Maybe we shouldn't rush and act like this thoughtlessly. Your parents are probably at home, and I'm not interested in tumbling on my marital bed. Jadwiga, but understand, my wife and I haven't slept together for a month. Yes, and I like you very much. He tried to kiss her, but she pulled away, and breaking away from his embrace, sat down at her desk. I don't think this is a good idea. Yes, and I need to work. Work. How to bring you gifts, you always had time. The same skins for your new mink coat, ring and all. How now? I'm free, you need to work. Amazing. Jadwiga realized that she had gone a little too far, immediately jumped up and walked up to Anthony, gently hugging his waist. She kissed him lightly on the chin, but didn't get angry. You see, I need to think, get used to the idea that you and I will be doing this in the place where you slept with your wife. Just give me time. Okay, I'll go. I still need to eat and work. But tomorrow I think you and I will come to visit me. He winked at her and left the office, quietly closing the door. Anthony walked down the corridor and whistled a light melody, and Jadwiga put her head on her hands folded on the table and sobbed silently. But the truth is, how could she stoop to just running after a married man like that, being led by him? But in her youth she was the first beauty for whom the most enviable gentleman remained. Now what? There is simply no trace left of the past. How to be. Maybe we should just pack our things and move to another city and get a new job. Although on the other hand, what will change from this? Well, even if she finds a new job there, what will that do for her? Absolutely nothing. After all, Anthony's place will be taken by another, the same. She wiped away her tears and opened the window, taking a few deep breaths. We need to calm down, otherwise the director will come in and she'll be sitting there, crying and ugly. What will she say about her eyes then? As for Anthony, it's worth going to visit him and doing as her grandmother told her. Then you can think about the future. But Jadwiga did not even suspect that the fast train from the outback was taking Barbara to her own grandmother. Well, Barbara, our station Oleg said when all 5 of them went out onto the platform early in the morning, when the sun had not yet risen, and the early fog covered the grass with a shroud. Now let's get your suitcase and think about what we should do. Come on, Oleg, I'll carry him myself, he's light. By the way, look, there is a horse harnessed to a cart. Maybe they will give us a ride to the village. Indeed, nearby stood a horse harnessed to a cart, where a man of unknown age was dozing. He always came to the station with his mare, because he knew very well that only this train would make a stop near their village. And many of the sufferers are looking for their famous grandmother Elsa, as everyone called her. And at her age, she could still give odds to many young people. What kind of braid? As thick as your hand and up to your waist. One day he saw Elsa swimming late at night on their lake. Where even strong men don't go, they said that this lake has no bottom. Who wants to check whether this is true or not? And she splashed in the water, on which the shimmer of moonlight glittered. How can you not believe that she is a witch? Especially when this old woman comes out of the water, and her wet hair, like a veil down her back, drags along her waist. Bruno. He shook the reins, and his filly set off, heading as usual towards the people. Young good. By any chance did you come to visit our Elsa? Yes to her. And you probably wait for such petitioners and sufferers every time. No, my grandmother told me about you. And he burst into a very unpleasant laugh, which gave many goosebumps. But seriously, I'm here every morning, because they go to see our grandmother a lot, so that's how I earn extra money. Get into the cart, I'll take you in. If necessary, you can stay in my hut. I live alone, and the house is big. Thank you, Alex said and looked at his companions. You were sent to us by higher powers. But I don't know what higher powers are. But since we came, it was certainly out of great need. Come on, sit down. There's no need for you to be cold. We'll come to me, give you some tea, and then to our grandmother's. But she doesn't accept morning prayers before the end. And she lives in the village. And how far is it from you? Alex couldn't calm down and kept asking the man, and he answered very willingly. Well, how is it in the village? Rather, behind the village, go a couple of kilometers further inland to the forest lake. She lives on the edge of the forest and collects herbs there. Does she have any relatives? Barbara inserted her word, trying to keep up with the young people and not be branded a prude. Yes, I had a daughter, but she died of a cold. An only granddaughter, Jadwiga, remained, but she lives in the city and rarely visits her grandmother. The girl became arrogant that Elsa would give her her gift. But I think that's where it all ends. Jadwiga has no talent, or doesn't, or simply doesn't want to. And then let them decide among themselves. The places here were truly beautiful, such a nature untouched by man and technology. Apparently her mother-in-law was right. These are places of power, but soon they stopped in front of a fairly large house, where their driver directed his horse and jumped off the cart as usual. He extended his hand to Barbara and said, "Let me help you. My name is Bruno. What about you?" The man's eyes were so blue that such a color simply does not exist in nature. Barbara, the woman said, spellbound, and extended her hand. Bruno's palm turned out to be tender and strong at the same time, and with a slight movement the man helped her get off the cart, took her suitcase, and led her into his house. More precisely, it was not a simple village house, but a solid wood frame, which not everyone could afford. And, as the woman noted, almost all the houses in the village were made of logs. Yes, we have a fairly prosperous village, and all thanks to Elsa. The man's words sounded like an answer to Barbara's silent question. It's because of her that a lot of people come to us, and where there is demand, there will always be supply. It's right. And the nature in your village is beautiful. Well, go into the house and serve tea, as promised. You can have tea, or something stronger. And if necessary, a bathhouse can be organized. The man said in a quiet voice, smiled slyly, and looked at the woman with bright blue eyes. This look, voice and touch made Barbara feel either sweaty or cold. She had never experienced anything like this with Anthony, who was the only man in her life. Lord, how embarrassing, the woman thought. To come to such a wilderness for help in order to save the family, and look at yourself. Barbara, look. Oleg's voice distracted her from such thoughts, and she looked in the direction where the guy was pointing. The sun was rising over the horizon. Barbara was truly delighted with what she saw, because she had almost never seen a sunrise like this, and what she saw amazed her. Bruno, it's so beautiful here that you can't even imagine. Probably for me. A villager cannot understand all this beauty. But I ask you to come into the house. Barbara entered the house and looked around. Is this really how people live in villages? Everything in the house was done with taste and skill. TV and refrigerator, microwave, massive table, and beautiful carved chairs. In general, this could be called a merchant's house, but not a cab driver's house. Yes, she should live here. Apparently, Bruno saw it all on her face and said directly, "If you want, you can stay here as long as you want." Bruno, thank you, of course, but you practically don't know me, and you never know what trouble I came here with. Yes, what a disaster. The man has your woman, but you cannot conceive a child. Do not argue. I see a lot too. But you, Barbara, decide your fate. The man shook his curly head and did not continue what he wanted to say. Bruno understood that silence is often golden. And Barbara smiled and thought for a minute maybe she really should leave her Anthony and start living here with this local handsome guy in this distant village and give birth to a bunch of little kids. God, how she wanted this to simply forget her past and come here. Bruno, thank you, but their conversation was interrupted by young people who had just managed to put things in the rooms allocated to them and went out into the hall. Alex looked carefully at Bruno and Barbara and immediately understood everything, but did not show it. Bruno, what about your famous tea? They say that you brew it with special herbs. This is what it is. But sit down. I'll put on the kettle and treat you to more honey than you've ever tasted in your life. When will it be possible to see Grandma? Don't worry, we won't miss it. In our village there is a small church, and then the church bell rang, which means the service is over. Then we can get ready. The woman nodded her head and sat down on a bench that stood under the icons, while Bruno and the young people set the table. After half an hour, such an aroma wafted through the room that you could lose your head from this sweet variety, and the smell of pies and honey made your stomach growl. Wow, what smells! What a treat for the eyes and belly, Helga said and reached for the pie. I'm so hungry that I'm ready to eat everything. Eat up, girl. You, as a future mother, will still need strength, Bruno said and looked at her carefully. Helga almost choked from these words, but casting a sideways glance at Bruno, did not say anything to him. Maybe this Bruno really knows that he won't even have to go to his grandmother. Barbara thought mentally. Good afternoon. Barbara crossed the threshold of a small house standing on the edge of the forest. Come on in. Don't stand in the doorway of my house. I'm glad to have guests. A stately and beautiful older woman, with a long braid, she looks like the heroine of old paintings, but certainly not like an old woman who brews another batch of potion and dries bats. As I understand it, you are coming to me about your husband. Yes, my name is Barbara, and my husband is Anthony. And I also came about the children. There is no way we can give birth to them. Yes, and you will not give birth to them from your own. He walks, and as long as she keeps him under her thumb, you will not live. Yes, and without her you would have separated. It's just a matter of time. Barbara was simply stunned by what she heard and almost fainted, leaning on the door frame. To avoid falling, she grabbed the door handle and closed her eyes for a second. Yes, I see that you didn't know about it, although you internally suspected it. So quickly sit down at the table. Here, have a drink. Barbara sat down on a bench and took a wooden mug with a drink from the witch's hands, drank it in one gulp, and, looking at it, said quietly, What am I supposed to do? What should I do? Waiting for a new husband. Although no, your destiny has already found you. Just wait a little and everything will be fine for you. And your own home and children and a good husband. Are you sure about that? Barbara still hoped that this was some kind of prank, and she would now get up, go home, and everything would be fine with them. Wait, and your destiny will come. I wonder who is my betrothed. Barbara looked at the woman ironically, not knowing how to react to the words, believe them or take them as a joke. You don't believe me, but I'll tell you one thing: he will have blue eyes. Dark-haired. Yes, you yourself will recognize him among many. Such a prince on a white horse. And Elsa burst into cheerful laughter. Then she sat down next to Barbara and looked carefully into her eyes. Taking her hand in hers, the healer began to stroke it and whisper something in an incomprehensible language. The woman sat spellbound and looked at her carefully, not knowing how to react, and then she simply began to feel inclined to sleep, and my head involuntarily dropped into my hands. Sleep, my girl, sleep. You didn't come here from a good life, from your orphanhood, but I will take away all your troubles, and may you dream about your real destiny. And Elsa carefully laid her down on the bench, put a pillow under her head, and went out into the yard where a group of young people were sitting. She glanced at the eldest among them and waved her hand, beckoning him to her. I see you are the eldest here. So listen, Barbara is sleeping now. Don't worry, everything will be fine with her. What do you understand, students? Yes, we have folklore expeditions, and if possible, then maybe you can tell us local legends, songs, or signs. Yes, young people these days are not too interested in magic, and even my granddaughter over there refused the gift, and I was so hoping to pass on my knowledge to her. And what will happen to your gift now? Helga looked carefully at this still strong woman and bit her lip, afraid to ask too much. What will happen, my dear? And she looked at another as her successor. Is that allowed? I take it this is a man? You understand everything correctly, man. And although in our family it is customary to pass the gift from grandmother to granddaughter, but if God is not worthy of a girl or something else, the gift should be passed on to a man. Interesting. What if he had no talent for your knowledge? My dear guests, understand that each of us has magic, and sometimes it hides so deeply that it is simply difficult to awaken it. But it exists, believe me, believe me. They sat and talked about everything and nothing, and Barbara was sleeping, and most surprisingly, she dreamed of the same Bruno who brought them from the station. But in this dream, it was no longer a simple man in old jacket and sneakers, but a handsome middle-aged man looking at her intently. And next to him stood two beautiful blue-eyed children. Barbara shouted his name so loudly that everyone on the street heard her voice and jumped out and quickly rushed into the house. Barbara, are you okay? Helga was the first to run up to her and took her hand. Yes, it was probably a dream. And there was Bruno who brought us here, two children. He took them into the house. Our house. So I saw my betrothed, thought Elsa. Barbara herself did not understand why she was so angry at the words of this woman that her future husband would come to her in a dream. But she jumped up from the bench and quickly ran out into the street. The woman, not understanding what she was doing, quickly headed away from the Elsa house towards the village with the only desire to pick up her things and leave here for her usual little world. Barbara, wait, where are you going? Bruno's voice sounded so unexpectedly that the woman tripped out of the blue and fell to her knees with all her might, painfully breaking her knee. Bruno, who asked you to scare you like that? Now my knees are broken. Forgive me, for God's sake, let's go, I'll treat your wounds. I have a first aid kit at home. It's not far from here, a few houses away. Already at home, Bruno himself treated her wounds and carefully looked at her face. What did our seer tell you? Judging by the expression on your face, you didn't like it at all. Imagine I didn't like it. I went for advice, but the outcome was completely different. Well, this happens in our world. Elsa said that there would be another, and this one was different. You, Bruno, came to me in a dream with two small children. Now Bruno himself was taken aback by what he heard and almost dropped from his hands the can of milk that he had brought from his neighbor. Is this really her, his destiny, which he has been waiting for so long, and which Elsa herself spoke about? This is the turn of events. He put the jar on the table, took out a cup and poured milk into it. He handed it to the woman. Drink this milk. Don't want. They've already given me something to drink in the morning. And after that it turned out that you are my destiny. What will happen after this milk? And she nodded towards the table with her head. Nothing will happen, because the milk is fresh. But whatever you want, I'll drink." Having poured himself some milk, Bruno drank the cup in one gulp and, putting it on the table, sat down on the bench. It turned out strange. But if this is true, then this woman is his future wife, and he will have the children he so wanted. "Barbara, what if you really are my destiny? And in your dream, did you really see our children?" "Bruno, do you understand how unrealistic and stupid this all is? We have only known each other for a couple of hours. We are seeing each other, one might say, for the first time. And you are talking about a family that may not exist. After all, I am married and I have a husband. Barbara, I'm sorry if I allowed myself more than I should, but I believe and I really, really want to have a family, children. And you are such a beautiful woman, I don't dare detain you any longer. At least you can always count on my hospitality." "Thank you, Bruno, I understand you, but it all seems so unreal and mystical to me." "How? It's like a fairy tale." Bruno looked at the woman with a smile and noted that she smiled back at him. "And thank you for your hospitality. If you accept, I will come to visit you again. Clean, so relax. Come. I will always be glad to see you." That's what they decided on. And in the evening, Bruno was taking the whole company back to the station, where the fast train heading to the capital was supposed to stop for. 3 minutes. Bruno helped load things into Barbara's carriage and, looking at her, said quietly, "If you need my help, come. I will not betray you, and I have enough money I can provide for you." "Bruno, thank you. I'll think about your proposal and, if necessary, I'll come." She stood at the window and waved her hand to him, and Bruno stood on the platform, and his heart sank with melancholy and sadness. That's how his love left, and he couldn't do anything. All we could do was wait and hope that the witch was right and Barbara would return. Barbara drove home, thinking about what the local healer told her. "Barbara, did you get answers to your questions?" Alex looked at the woman carefully. "Don't even know. I had more questions than answers. What should we do with them?" She shrugged and turned out the window. I began to look at the trees, stations, and houses flying past without finding an answer. Barbara thought and thought and thought and thought, and time passed inexorably, giving no hope for a better outcome. "Anthony, hello. Here I am." Barbara tried to put a smile on her face, because according to legend, she returned from vacation and should have been fresh and rested. But the answer was silence in the apartment. Strange. At the station, she called Anthony and said she was on her way. To which the husband snapped, "Come, I'm home." Yes, Anthony was at home, but not alone, but with Jadwiga. The woman finally came to his home and spent the night on her lover's marital bed. Tea. "Now, Anthony, I'll probably go. Now your wife will arrive. I don't want her to see me. Now I will decide in this house. I'm tired of you and I constantly hiding, and I think we should talk frankly with my wife and amicably decide what and how." "Are you sure?" The mistress looked at him carefully and stroked his hair. "Yes, I am sure. In the meantime, my wife is traveling." The couple was so carried away by each other that they simply did not hear the door open and Barbara enter the apartment. She called her husband, and without receiving an answer, followed the noise into her own bedroom. What opened before her eyes instantly threw the woman into shock, and she simply did not know what to say, what to do. Barbara stood and looked at all this obscenity and simply remained silent. But Jadwiga noticed her first and screamed. The woman pulled the blanket over herself, covering her naked body. "Anthony, stop." She pushed him and pointed at the doorway with her eyes. "Barbara, weren't you taught to knock?" There was anger and indignation in his voice. After all, his own wife dared to stop him at a very interesting place to knock. "Anthony, are you serious? You brought your mistress into our bedroom, and I have to knock on the door of my own apartment." "Yes. In the meantime, please, my dear wife, prepare some food for us while we rest." From such words, Barbara was not only speechless, she fell into a kind of stupor. Stupor shackled her thoughts and will, and leaving her suitcase in the corridor, she obediently went to the kitchen. A mountain of unwashed dishes, leftover potatoes on the stove, dried soup, all this was waiting for her there. Anthony's voice sounded impudent, arrogant, and mocking. "Imagine, my dear husband, I cooked soup. and she threw a pan of boiling water onto the bed, almost hitting Anthony and his mistress. "What is your crazy wife doing?" Jadwiga screamed and jumped out of bed naked, grabbed her clothes and began to dress feverishly. She should be sued. Look, I have a burn on my legs. Better yet, take her to a mental institution." Madhouse? Barbara could not believe her ears and the fact that her husband did not react in any way to his mistress's words. "I'll call the police now and they'll take you away from here." "Barbara, calm down and don't shout. We need to talk about how adults can decide, so to speak, everything amicably." "Amicably, my dear husband. They decide to dress and not jump out of bed. You don't have to worry. I don't need your excuses, explanations, and everything else." She threw the empty pan on the bed and went to her room. She began to collect things in her bag, throwing them away without folding them. Barbara grabbed documents, money, and the few jewelry that her husband had given her from the table, and throwing everything into a small backpack, ran out of the room. Barbara quickly headed towards the exit, but her path was blocked by Anthony, who had managed to put on trousers for decency. "Barbara, where are you going? What are you doing? Don't you see?" Jadwiga said with a malicious smile. "She simply leaves you, and you should just file for divorce." "Jadwiga, I didn't give you my word here. Let him clean for you, cook, iron your shirts, get along with your mother and father. Or have you forgotten what your parents told you when you married me?" Anthony would never forget these words. When they first submitted an application to the registry office, the father threatened, "This is your first and last marriage. Take care of your family. If you get divorced, all your property will be transferred to your daughter-in-law. And it doesn't matter for what reason they would divorce, there will be no children, or the wife won't please. My mother and I will always be on my daughter-in-law's side. Moreover, Barbara Sirota, and to offend such people is a sin. It's a sin, Father, to live with someone you don't love. But I won't leave Barbara." But now he remembered that conversation, and he had no choice but to bite his lips and think about what to do. Jadwiga jumped out of bed at such words and, like a fish, gasped for air. She simply did not expect such a turn of events. It was not easy for her to accept the fact that her legal wife so easily accepted the very fact of betrayal, but also that this person has every chance of ending up on the street, and in the status of a beggar and homeless man. And who needs it? Anthony tried with all his might to restrain his anger and not raise his hand against his wife, so as not to kill her. "Do you understand that it was a moment of weakness?"
So minute that you had enough time to get from work and here. Anthony, don't try to tell me stories now. You have been with this woman for quite a long time, and thank God that everything turned out this way.
"It happened. How is that?"
Jadwiga could not forgive anyone for disgracing her like that, and not even allowing her to get a word in.
"Jadwiga, you are a grown woman. You were simply used. You satisfied your own ego, and that's all. Or did you think that he would give up his wealth for you? Never. Has he ever given you a valuable gift?" "No, I didn't give it. Only a bouquet of lilies of the valley, and even then from our city flower bed." Jadwiga, of course, blatantly lied about everything, trying to downplay the importance of Anthony in her life, as well as the volume of financial investments in her. "You see, did you want to cheat him out of money?" Barbara stopped for a minute and mentally wondered if she had taken everything, if she had taken all the most valuable things. Barbara came out of the entrance and looked carefully. "Yeah, there's Anthony's car. The neighbors on the bench have been gossiping since the very morning the kids have been scurrying around in the sandbox." The woman put her backpack on the bench and thought for a minute. Where should she go? No, as a last resort, you can, of course, call your mother-in-law and ask to stay with her for the first time. Barbara didn't even know how and what to do next, because Anthony knows where she lives, or rather she lived before, and where she works. For the sake of money, he will pester her with his visits, ask for forgiveness, and try to return her. But no, I won't let you interfere in my life. What if you return to the village, to that same Bruno, to his log house, and stay there forever? Barbara thought to herself and sat down on the bench for a minute. But then the front door slammed and Anthony ran out into the street, all disheveled and angry. Apparently the showdown with Jadwiga was serious. Look, her husband's face is so red. The anger makes my eyes flash like lightning. He looked for Barbara, and when he noticed her on the bench, he exhaled with relief and approached, trying to speak as calmly as possible. "Barbara, I ask you, let's talk quietly and calmly. Let's talk like adults and reasonable people. How's that? Do reasonable people really just drag all sorts of indecent things onto the marital bed?" "Well, you see, she tempted me. But I love you. Don't drive me away. It seems to me that you are more worried about your parental capital than about me, or where I was on how to resolve the issue with children. What would you do if she got pregnant? Would you live with 2 families? But this is a utopia. Your parents would not accept this state of affairs. And where would you do something? Oh, Anthony, tell me, please." "Don't know." Anthony really didn't know what he would do next. After all, he never planned his life so far ahead. "And now I will still stay with you." "No, Anthony, I just don't need you. Sorry, but I'm leaving you."
Okay, now I have a question. And where do you intend to go?
He stood and looked at her with an angry, twisted face, cherishing the last hope that his wife would ask to go home. "Believe me, my dear hubby, this question should not worry you in any way. Yeah, that means you have someone to go to. And you will tell me that I am cheating on you. Were you really planning on leaving for someone else? I don't have any lover, and you shouldn't attribute your own sins to me, and I can go, for example, live with your mother for a while, and then think about who I should be with." She turned around and, picking up her bag, walked towards the roadway, where on the side of the road she simply raised her hand and began to catch the car. But the woman did not want to upset Mary, and she will tell her all her adventures later. Now it's time to think and think about everything calmly. "And where are we going, dear girl?" The driver winked at her cheerfully and turned the ignition key in his old, but still working car with checkers on the door. "Come on," she waved, so to speak, without looking at the train station. The driver nodded his head in understanding and rushed off, trying to drive carefully and avoid getting into holes and potholes so that the passenger with sad eyes, God forbid, would not get seasick. They drove for quite a long time, about 15 minutes, or even 20. Although, needless to say, it was the peak of the lunch break, and it was also Friday. Many residents of the metropolis tried at these moments to leave the stuffy city, but she wanted to see Bruno again. "Sorry, did you say something?" The driver looked carefully at this strange passenger, who was muttering something absurd under her breath. "Did you tell me something?" "Oh no, sorry, I didn't say anything." Probably from an old habit. The taxi driver nodded understandingly and continued on his way. And Barbara continued to look out the window at the city landscapes flying by, and with every second her confidence grew more and more. Confidence that she should go to Bruno and come what may. And let me be considered a walker, but at least this is honest. And then I'll go to court. The taxi driver looked in the mirror at his passenger and did not say a word. You never know what kind of clients you come across. The main thing is that they get paid. And then it's no longer his business. Barbara paid the driver and, taking her bag, entered the old station building. She looked at the display of departing and arriving trains. Yeah, here's the direction she needs. Girl, give me a ticket for the evening train number 157. Yes, full. When the ticket was in her pocket, Barbara realized how hungry she was. Yeah, from one train to another. And I didn't even have time to change clothes, eat, or take a normal shower. That's why she wildly wanted to throw off her dusty clothes, stand under the stream of hot water and wash away all her sorrows and sorrows. But in the evening, Barbara sat comfortably in her compartment and, taking out a mirror, carefully looked at her reflection. It's good that I at least washed my face in the toilet, otherwise I would have walked around looking tired and exhausted. It's such a pity that she didn't take Bruno's phone. After all, even if he doesn't want to accept her, he'll simply send her home. So what should she do then? Yes, do nothing. I'll just go back to my room and continue working. Although why on earth would she return to her little room? She legally has the right to part of the apartment, which his parents gave her and Anthony for their wedding. Therefore, to hell with dogs. Out of principle, I won't let you live comfortably with your mistress. And it's true. And this Jadwiga wanted not only to grab her husband with a hook, but also her property. What if she can get pregnant? Barbara tossed and turned in bed all night with such thoughts, but could not sleep a wink. Just before dawn, she went out into the vestibule and began to look out the window. Forest, fields, power lines, all this flashed before her eyes, like her own life, gray and joyless. And I really wanted normal human relationships, warmth and comfort. Girl, your station is next. The conductor handed her a ticket and smiled sweetly. So all my life on wheels. The carriage is her home, Barbara thought. But apparently everyone chooses their own destiny. It's nothing you can do. After 20 minutes, she was already standing on an empty platform far from her house and turning her head just like the first time. Everything around was shrouded in fog. It was so quiet that you could hear the dew dripping from the grass. Yes, neither Bruno nor his cart and mare were visible. Was she really so mistaken, and he simply didn't come? But he said that he's here every day. But as it turned out, he lied. Barbara stood and almost cried. But then in the distance she heard first quiet, and then more and more distinct clattering of hooves. And now the cart appeared. Has he really arrived? Didn't you lie? Barbara. Bruno immediately recognized her figure from afar and thought to himself with surprise that he had made a mistake. But no. What are you doing here? You just left. Bruno, is your proposal that you can stay in the village relevant? Barbara tried to squeeze out a smile, but it came out somehow crooked and askew. Yes, sure. I see you are alone here. There is no one else. Then get on the cart and let's go. The man helped her sit more comfortably on the cart and lightly spurred his mare. Now they were driving in silence, not saying a word. And what could we talk about? Bruno understood that Barbara had not come here again out of a good life and asked to stay with him. And the woman felt uncomfortable explaining something along the way. Barbara, can I ask a question? Why did I come here? You know, your healer was right. And my husband is not just walking around, but he also managed to bring his mistress into our house, put her on the bed, and asked me to make them some soup.
Yeah, thought Bruno, this woman has nothing good. Apparently, she really didn't come here out of good happiness, but that means Elsa was really right. This woman is his destiny. That's exactly what she said in the evening, when Barbara had already left. And he drank quietly alone in his own kitchen.
You're still standing there drunk, Bruno. Elsa's voice sounded right next to his ear, causing the man to tremble so much that he almost spilled the glass of tincture. Ugh, Elsa. You walk like a cat. At least cough at the threshold for decency. What if I'm with a woman? Yes, with what woman? Except with this little white one. And the healer nodded at the bottle of cloudy tincture that stood in the very center of the table. You shouldn't get drunk. Look, you'll still sleep through tomorrow morning. Well, tomorrow will be a normal morning, that's all. That's not all, said the old woman. I had a vision that Barbara would arrive tomorrow. So you should be at the station as usual. Understood me? I understand. I haven't drunk my brains out yet. But why would Barbara come back? She didn't believe a single word you said. Well, whether you believed it or not, it's none of your business. But she will most likely believe her own eyes when she comes home and sees her husband in bed with his mistress. Are you sure about this? And if she doesn't see it, then what? She didn't even look in my direction. And you say that she will come to me? Let's argue. If he comes, you will take me as godmother to your child. Yes, deal. If so, then I will carry you in my arms for this. He hugged the old woman, and she patted him on the back and spoke quietly. Better stop drinking and go to bed. Tomorrow will be a new day and a new life. True, from the very morning Bruno kept doubting whether he should go to the station or not. After all, the witch did not receive on Mondays and the people knew it. But now maybe it's not worth going. Looking at his reflection in the mirror, the man ran his hand over his stubble. No, I'll probably go. Now I'll go and shave and go now. All this flashed through his head in a matter of seconds. And Bruno, quietly nodding at the mare, glanced sideways at Barbara. She too was silent, mentally recalling how she found her husband in bed and that his mistress turned out to be a Polish woman. Bruno, do you believe Eliza? Do you believe what she says? Why not believe? Just recently I couldn't even imagine that you would come, but now you're here. He wanted to say that she herself asked to stay with him, but he bit his tongue just in time. And I myself asked to live with you. Is that what you wanted to say, Bruno? If you don't want me to live with you, then stop your horse. I'll go back. No, Barbara, you definitely won't leave here now. And if you are embarrassed by the fact that you will live with me as a guest, then I can tell you right away, marry me, and you will be a full-fledged mistress in my house. The woman looked sideways at Bruno and was just about to say something when her mobile phone rang. Looking at the screen, Barbara picked up the phone. Yes, Mary. Harry, Barbara, where are you? Bruno has been calling me since the morning. He says you're missing. No, you are neither at work nor in your room, in the dorm. And now I'm going for the second round to the village where the healer Elsa lives. For the second round. How can we understand what is actually happening? Were you there or not? Was. But I didn't really like what you told me the first time. Oh, how can I tell you, Mary Pavlovna, your son definitely has a mistress, and I want to divorce him. But where are you now? I'm going to the village, and I'm thinking of staying here for a while. Are you sure about this? My mother-in-law understood that nothing could be solved by shouting and swearing, so she tried to speak calmly. Yes, just don't get me wrong. It's hard for me to forgive betrayal. I need to think and make a decision with a calm mind. That's right, Barbara. But please call me. Do not get lost. Of course, I understand that my son is not perfect, but I would not want to lose a daughter-in-law like you. I heard you, and thank you for everything that you have done and are doing for me. Barbara hung up the phone and looked into the distance. The first rays of the morning sun illuminated the wheat field, and a light breeze made the ears look like a gentle sea. This is the truth, how fate can put everything in its place. The mother-in-law turned out to be closer to her husband and mother, and the stranger simply took him in and sheltered him in his house. Did she, mother-in-law, call?
Bruno looked at the woman carefully, trying not to show his excitement.
Yes, she said that Anthony was looking for me. She probably asked you to come back? Oddly enough, but no. After all, he understands I don't have the character to forgive betrayal like that. But you, Bruno, are still ready to host a married lady. Ready. But may I ask, how long will this sweet lady remain married? Not for long. Just believe me, we need to think about the situation a little now. And in a few days I'll just file for divorce. That's all. Bruno wanted to ask what about us, but he bit his tongue and turned his horse towards his house. He opened the gate and led the horse into the yard. Then he helped Barbara bring things into the house and, pointing to a cozy back room, said, "This is my daughter's room. You can stay here as long as you want." "Do you have a daughter?" Barbara looked at the man in surprise. "Yes, I had a woman when I was young, but it probably didn't work out. But I don't abandon my daughter, I help her. And if you want, I can introduce her." Bruno's words startled her. But the woman just smiled and answered, "Yes, we should probably get to know each other, but a little later. And to be honest, Bruno, I don't even know how to react to your proposal." "Which one exactly?" "To meet my daughter, or remain a full-fledged mistress in your house." "He will only be glad of this." Elsa's words behind them made both of them flinch. "You are back after all, Barbara. So I was right. Yes, and you were right. I wanted to come to you later, but I got ahead of you." "Nothing. I always say what I see, and it always comes true. Anyway, on the occasion of your arrival, I brought you a cake. I baked it myself. Knew you'd be back, Barbara." Barbara looked carefully at a real masterpiece of culinary skill with pigtails, curls with 2 doves on top. "Wow, just wedding. But we are not husband and wife yet. But you are a couple that fate brought together. And you shouldn't deny this. Bruno will make you feel good. But if in doubt, don't rush into a decision. Just wait and see, and your Anthony will show his true colors. And then you will finally make the right decision." Elsa turned around and went to the gate. And the man and woman stood at the porch of the house and, dumbfounded, looked after her. "Yes, Barbara, and if you want, then come to my place for tea tonight with Bruno." Barbara nodded her head silently and turned her gaze to Bruno, who also looked at her incomprehensibly. Anyway, which have not be avoided. By evening, Barbara had gotten a little comfortable in the house, laid out her simple belongings, and having prepared dinner, sat down on the veranda. "How do you like it, Barbara? In my house, if you need something, you always say, 'We won't buy it in our store.' This way you can go to the city. I have a car in my garage." "Do you have a car? What about the horse and cart? Why don't you drive a car? You see, this is a kind of production, an entourage or something, but nothing more. Believe me, Barbara, this is all the man gestured around the house and the farmstead with her predictions and help. You can be sure of this. Yes, I'll try. But Bruno, tell me, what did Elsa mean when she said that my husband would show his face?
But you can ask her this. It's time for us to get ready for a visit.
Here is the familiar little hut again. Grass is on the walls, sedge on the floor. Everything here breathed with a certain mystery, about which epics and fairy tales are written. It's so fairy tale-like here. Perhaps the only thing missing is a black cat.
But why is it not enough? I have one like this in my house. Apparently he just decided to go for a walk. Or, as always, he went out hunting for mice.
Wow. Elsa, can I ask a question? What did you mean when you said that my Anthony would show his true colors? But really, should I be afraid of physical harm from him? Or will Anthony, as always, limit himself to a verbal skirmish? Yes, you see, Barbara, your Anthony is not as simple as it might seem. But I won't tell you anything yet. You must see everything for yourself with your own eyes. But I hope he won't harm me. She really was scared. After all, you never know what you can expect from an angry husband. Don't worry, he won't cause any physical harm to you or anyone else. But you will see everything for yourself later. Barbara nodded her head, but the anxiety did not go away. The unknown scared her. But the woman's anxiety was also noticed by Bruno, who simply took her hand and, leaning towards her face, spoke quietly. Don't worry, Barbara. I'm also difficult and will always protect you. Do you understand me? His voice sounded different, not the same as always, but confident and tough. There was a sense of animal strength in him. This sent goosebumps down Barbara's arms, and looking at them, the woman noticed how the hairs stood on end. She simply nodded her head, mentally agreeing. But why lie to yourself? It was so nice when a man solves all your problems, when he takes responsibility for his own woman, home, and in general. But apparently Bruno's intonation somewhat frightened Barbara. And noticing the expression on her face, the man immediately spoke, quickly softening his intonation. Barbara, I'm sorry if I scared you, but I'm really not a mama's boy or some guy from the village. I have a higher education, 3 diplomas, and work in a hospital. As fate would have it, he even became a novice in a monastery. But now I live here. Wow. Wow. You, Bruno, have a biography. But Barbara still wanted to say something when at that moment she received a call. Yes, someone knows how to interrupt a conversation, the woman thought. But looking at the mobile screen, she sighed heavily. Well, yes, who else could call her? Faithful hubby Anthony, who apparently cooled down after a fit of rage and decided to dial it. Barbara, where are you? The once beloved husband asked without words of greeting. Anthony, why do you need this? Well, you have your polished girlfriend, so live with her. I will file for divorce myself. You don't have to worry. Yeah, there's really nothing to worry about. And will you also leave me the apartment, which, by the way, my parents bought? I'll leave it if the court agrees to give me a divorce. A minute of silence on the phone spoke eloquently. Anthony was calculating all the pros and cons, feverishly wondering what the catch was. Barbara, tell me the whole truth. What's the catch? You are giving me the apartment just like that, without trying to defend it for yourself. I'm not as mercantile as you. Come on, how pious you are. The woman heard her husband's heavy, angry breathing on the phone, and could not understand how until now she had not noticed all this, all his anger and greed and lust. God, how blind she was. And why are you silent? Or do you have nothing to say? Just imagine, there is something. Why do you think we haven't had children until now? I wonder why. You shouldn't answer though. My dear husband, it's all my fault. That's what you always said. No, all this time I gave you one special herbal decoction, and thanks to it you could not get pregnant. And why? I didn't need a wife like you. You were picked up on the street like a puppy, warmed up and given a successful marriage. But why do I need a wife without family and tribe? A beggar who could not give anything to me and my children. Is that all you wanted to tell me? Said Barbara, surprised that she had not yet fainted from what she heard. Yes, Anthony shouted into the phone. Barbara simply pressed the end button, not wanting to continue this conversation any further. She leaned her head against the warm wood of the house and closed her eyes. Lord, what an idiot and a brute she lived with all these years. And she firmly believed that he loved her, that everything would be fine with them. Did your husband call? Bruno looked at her carefully and nervously fingered a black rosary with a cross hanging on it in his hand. Yes, he threatened. And you are right, and Elsa. He gave me a very, very unpleasant surprise. So to speak, he opened his eyes and showed his own black insides. Elsa smiled and, raising an eyebrow, looked at the woman, as if asking, and what did he tell you there? Barbara sat with her eyes closed and didn't know whether to tell them or not everything that Anthony had told her. But all this put such pressure on her from within that she simply did not have the strength to remain silent. Elsa, you can't imagine how hard my soul is right now. I just don't know how to live with this anymore. Tell me, maybe I can help you with advice. And I, if necessary, with my fists and a gun. Bruno sat closer to Barbara and took her hand in his. But the woman didn't even notice it. You see, all this time while my husband and I lived, he slipped some herbs into my food or drink. I don't know where, and I couldn't get pregnant. And all this time, my husband bullied me and reproached me for being infertile, for not being able to consider myself a full-fledged woman and mother. A tear quietly rolled down her cheek, but only Elsa noticed her, who sat down next to her and quietly stroked her hand. Nothing, Barbara, believe me, every poison has its own antidote. Me and Bruno will help you feel good again. Do you think I can have children? What are you saying? And you don't need to understand me. With these words I conjure fear and sadness. But Bruno will bring water from my stream and we will drink tea. And then everything will be fine with you. By the way, let's go to the forest today. Can you help me find a fern flower? Today is the night when your deepest desires can come true. An hour later, the company went to the local lake, where almost the entire village had actually gathered. Wow, Barbara thought, looking around. There were tents with benches and tables around the lake. A variety of foods were cooked over an open fire, and there were trays and refrigerators with drinks and sweets. There was no crowd of young people. Don't be surprised. We have ethno-tourism at the highest level. And my experience and knowledge help the villagers get on their feet, earn an honest living, and show guests a different side of village life, and ancient wisdom. Honestly, I couldn't even think. Barbara, we also have swings installed on the field. Let's go for a ride. Swing? Doom. The woman's surprise knew no bounds. Yes, these type of boats on high poles. Believe me, it's very exciting. He grabbed her hand and pulled her into the field, where indeed a high swing had already been installed, and people were crowding around it to take a ride with the breeze. Barbara and Bruno rode on boats, laughed like children, enjoying the wind in their hair, the night sky, and the fact that they could surrender to the holiday like this and not think about anything. And Barbara rejoiced like a child, not at all reproaching herself for being able to rejoice and enjoy freedom. I feel as good today as I have never felt in my life. And I'm not even the least bit ashamed of my actions, because I left my husband. I'm not even angry at him for his words, but for what he did. Because why? Bruno looked at her carefully and gently pulled her towards him, putting his arm around her shoulders. Because I'm finally free. Bruno leaned over and gently kissed her mulled wine-sweet lips, lightly and unobtrusively, trying not to frighten off such a moment of trust. The man was afraid that Barbara would push him away. But either nature or herbs or wine made her more pliable to her desires, which she always suppressed in herself, forcing her to respond to his kiss with a passionate and demanding kiss. Barbara, of course, I'm glad that you allowed me to kiss you. But let's not rush. And this is what a man tells me. It's strange, usually it's the partner who has to say it. But no, don't think anything like that. You are a beautiful woman. I like you very much. But I don't want you to regret your momentary weakness later. Barbara pulled away from Bruno but did not let go of his hand, but turned around and pulled him towards the lake. Then maybe we can go make wreaths and float them on the water. Let's go. They wove wreaths, threw them into the water, picked flowers and rejoiced at the night, like children lying on the grass and counting the stars in the sky. Good morning, Barbara. Bruno lay leaning on his hand and looked at her with a smile. Bruno, I hope you and I didn't sleep yesterday. I wanted to ask Barbara, but I didn't dare ask such a frank question. Weren't we asleep? No. You don't have to worry about this. We were by the river, weaving wreaths, counting the stars in the sky. You leaned on my shoulder and just fell asleep. Why didn't I bring you home? Well, because you asked me to take you here. Here is the answer to your question. How did we end up here? Yeah, I don't know, Bruno, what came over me yesterday. Probably your tea or local mulled wine. But I admit, it was the best day of my life. But Bruno, there is no need to spoil such a wonderful morning. Let's put this aside for a while. Then come on, get up. I'll prepare you a real rural breakfast at home. Oh, that already sounds great. Bruno helped his unexpected night companion get up and led her home again. They walked along a field path, smoothly turning into a rural road, and chatted about nothing. And Barbara more and more often caught herself thinking that she felt wildly, to the point of pain in her heart. She always wanted to walk like this, talk, and not think about anything. Barbara, what are you thinking about now? Bruno looked carefully into her face, hidden under the flowers of yesterday's flower. Yes, you just shine from the inside. Is it true? Yes, you know, Bruno, I want to tremble in my knees and just walk like that and not think about anything. Then I propose to meet the dawn in the field every morning. How do you like this idea? Unless, of course, you sleep until noon. No, and I don't sleep until noon. That's why I like the idea itself. And it's true. What can I say? Fate itself brought these two together. It was brought together in the most mysterious way when, a month after they met, Barbara and Bruno soon got married, and the local priest married them in an ancient wooden church, where many people from the village and surrounding towns came. This was the first wedding in this temple. And the clergyman himself said then, by combining this couple in a legal marriage, we launch into our hearts not only love, but also the piety of our Lord, love each other, be fruitful, and live happily ever after. Oddly enough, Barbara's ex-mother-in-law came to their wedding and was sincerely happy for her former daughter-in-law. She even asked Barbara for forgiveness when she was leaving and asked to come visit them. Things didn't work out for her son with Jadwiga. Anthony then took her to the station for the last time and asked, "Did you even love me?" Well, how can I tell you? Anthony probably loved her in her own way. But you yourself understand that you have nothing, because your parents gave all their property to Barbara. Why do I need this? If we had children, where would we live? In my apartment? Sorry, Anthony, but you can't build a family on such conditions. So the girl cheerfully kissed him goodbye on the cheek and jumped into her carriage, waving to him from the steps. Yeah, what a fool you were, Anthony. You lost everything you had, your wife who loved you, the opportunity to have children and a home, and his parents abandoned him. They simply stopped communicating and answering phone calls. But one fine evening this happened. Anthony, hi, this is Barbara. If you still remember. Anthony made me sweat and get goosebumps all over my body. Of course he remembered her and could not forget her. No matter how hard I tried, I immersed myself in my work. Drinking and partying, nothing helped. Hello, Barbara. Of course I remember hearing from my mother that you got married. Well, your free life didn't last long? Yes, not for long. That's not why I'm calling. Barbara thought for a minute whether she should have said this or not, but she still said, I want to thank you so much for bringing Jadwiga to our house, and I witnessed it. Otherwise, I would not have returned to this village, would not have decided to have a relationship with Bruno, and would not have gotten pregnant. Yes, Anthony, I am carrying twins under my heart, so thank you very much. From what he heard, Anthony's cheekbones twisted. They played with anger, but the man could not say anything in response. All this could have been his, but it never happened, and all due to my own stupidity. Is that all you wanted to tell me? Yes. Although no, I signed over the apartment that your parents registered in my name. So you can live in peace and build new relationships and tell her thank you very much. You can gloat. Jadwiga left me after a few days. Now I'm free like a bird. But when I meet her, I will definitely say your regards. Thank you, Anthony, and all the best to you. Barbara hung up, and Anthony just held the phone in his hand for a few more minutes and listened to the short beeps, not knowing how to react. No way. Barbara is happy. She has a new husband and 2 children, and he was left without a home and family. Even his relatives abandoned him, and he himself is to blame for this, because there is no one else to blame. But Bruno himself had a different opinion. Barbara, maybe you shouldn't have called him and told him all this. He gently hugged her shoulders, approaching her from behind. Bruno, you know, I've wanted to say this to his face for so long that I probably wouldn't be able to restrain myself. And as Elsa says, It's better to regret what you did than what you didn't do. As if your ex-hubby wouldn't do any harm. But you are with me. Barbara looked at her husband in bewilderment. With you. But Barbara, just understand, you can't always cause harm just by deeds. You can use an unkind word or a conspiracy. But that's it, you definitely got this from Elsa. Or maybe she has it too. But tomorrow I'll still go to her and let her give you a talisman. Which, I don't want your ex-husband to have any influence on you. He kissed his wife tenderly, stroked her rounded belly, and put his ear to it. Barbara, the children are already knocking their feet, asking to be brought into the world as soon as possible. And it's definitely a boy. By the way, what did we decide with the names? The woman smiled and looked at her husband. This issue has been on their agenda for a long time. And if they decided on the name for the girl Mary, in honor of the former mother-in-law, then they did not decide on the name for the boy. Let's ask Elsa. She will be our godmother, so let her give the boy a name herself. Barbara nodded her head in agreement with her husband and kissed him tenderly on the cheek. And really, is it worth arguing with the man you love when everything can be resolved with the help of a wonderful godmother? They stood on the shore of the lake and watched how the sun set in the field, how the winter sun hid behind the rare branches of still bare trees. Barbara was happy that now she had a person next to her who would not just say, "I'm with you," but also protect her, lend her shoulder, and protect her from problems. And may everything be fine for everyone, even Anthony. Not having met his wife from the maternity hospital, the husband went to his mistress. And 5 years later, Barbara was walking home from the antenatal clinic. But no, walking is the wrong word. She was hopping, then suddenly quickening her step, then stopping on the run. The young woman was happy and kept replaying in her head the words of the pretty doctor. "Are you going to have a baby? Are we going to register? Or do you have other plans?" After such a provocative question, Barbara almost angrily retorted, "Did you really think I would want to terminate the pregnancy?" The doctor smiled. "Why were you so shocked? You're young, you're beautiful. According to the examination, you're perfectly healthy. Now girls like you, trying to make a career, make their way to the top, and strengthen themselves on the material Olympus. Only then, in their 30s, do they think of procreation. You're only 21. Things happen. You and your husband are still students, I take it?" The woman's doctor was right on the money. She and Calvin were still in their 4th year of university. He's a lawyer-to-be, she's a philologist. But their flat is not a rented one, but a real one, their own. They live in 2 cozy, spacious rooms. It was the parents on both sides of the family who had splurged on the apartment as a wedding present. Barbara lit up with pleasure, imagining Calvin's delight at her news of the addition to the family. They'd been married for 3 years, but things had somehow never worked out before with a baby. She'd even dragged her husband to a consultation at an expensive private clinic, where they'd been examined from top to toe. The summary was pleasing. Both are practically healthy. No physiological incompatibility is observed. Be patient for 1 year to 3 years if you are not specifically using protection. Lack of conception is considered normal, they were told at the clinic. Barbara smiled slyly at the time. Any hint of contraceptive use was immediately put to rest, she told Calvin. "It's too early, you say, and you would like to buy nappies and a nappy at about 40 years old. Maybe it's too early for us to have a close relationship if you are not yet morally ready to take responsibility for the child. When you're mentally ready, I'll keep you warm." Calvin agreed with her reasoning pretty quickly. And who among men would like all these restrictions and obstacles? It's just boredom and zero fun. The subject was once and for all closed. Except that once a month, Barbara's mood briefly soured. Her body signaled that she was, alas, not pregnant again. In the years of reckless youth, such disappointments passed quickly. Calvin would drag her out to a nightclub, to the cinema, or to her favorite pastry shop. Then they'd sit side by side, cramming notes, each on a different subject, serious ones. Calvin liked to quiz her on the US Penal Code, testing his memory at the same time. Nonsense's wife judged through gritted teeth with a disapproving look. "I can't get those laws mixed up. I know the criminal code almost by heart, unlike you. So who are you giving a stern look to? Honey used to look tough when he was a lawyer. The world of crime is not a family life. Spell it with an I. They usually ended with a passionate reconciliation in each other's arms. Barbara dreamed again. Maybe it's happened, and she's already pregnant. Barbara came from a large family, adored all 4 of her sisters. She couldn't imagine life without children's voices and the noise of the house. The Smith family in a town near Los Angeles knew everyone. No kidding, they were proud of them. Olivia was too bright for a small town. How did her parents come to name this red-headed, freckle-faced beauty? She was always either pregnant or nursing. The girl gave birth one after another. All the daughters were completely similar to the handsome father who could play in the cinema some English lord. Call him Christian, as his parents called him, the townspeople refused flatly. He was called simply Chris since he settled with his wife in this favorable town. The story of their young family from the first moment aroused the burning interest of the neighbors, the descendants of old-school immigrants. Their ancestors had migrated to the United States with the Germans under the great leaders of the country, when German colonists were drawn to the lands between the great rivers. Croats, Englishmen, Poles, Serbs, Bulgarians were occasionally found among them. A mixture of blood, a mixture of nations. The descendants have almost no authentic features left from those ancient times, except that they still gave their children unusual names by American standards. And so it turned out that in a shady town drowning in orchards, settled permanently Christian and Olivia. The tradition of giving their children rare names was probably the only thing that this family kept sacredly unchanged. They named their first daughter Amanda. Then came Bridget, Florence, Barbara, and the last baby Emma. Chris and Olivia, as they were persistently called in the town, were considered hard-working and good-natured people. They loved their girls and the land, which gave them rich crops for their careful care. And everything would have been fine and quiet. Only fate had decreed otherwise. On little Emma, it seemed, the laboring woman's strength had run out. God was no longer going to grant Olivia any new heirs. Moreover, already at an early age it became clear that the tiny Emma is not all well with health. The disease was selective. Emma had no difficulty swallowing water or food. She didn't have any seizures that frightened others. She was barely behind her peers in speech, hearing, and vision. Her fate was weak muscles that did not allow her to move freely according to the inexhaustible childlike energy. The little girl's body seemed to be in some terrible spasm all the time. It was both frightening and painful to watch. Olivia, who had always worked in the garden, had suddenly grown quiet. She stopped wearing brightly colored sundresses, smiling at neighbors when they met, chatting to women in the queue at the shop. When there is real grief in someone's home, people secretly try to avoid people so that the negativity is not transmitted. Christian and Olivia marveled at this sudden isolation at first, but then they accepted it. God is the judge of these hard hearts. Mary, the elderly neighbor, who had been through a lot herself, did not separate her parents from themselves. On the contrary, Mary kept telling Olivia, "Come to the witch Dr. Betty, who lives 20 kilometers from us. Maybe she can tell you something. What to do with your baby." After listening to her recommendations, Christian and Olivia decided to do the experiment, put little Emma in the back seat of their car, and went to the address. Betty asked no unnecessary questions. Whispering with her lips, she crossed the girl and gave her verdict. "Don't shed your tears for nothing. Your child is sunny, kind, affectionate. She will continue her strange movements with the support of her arms and legs. But she will warm people's hearts all her short life. Soon she will begin to do her chores. She will have no equal in affection and warm power in your town. Everyone will want to touch the magic girl to warm her soul." And then Betty quickly ushered them out the door with the girl. Christian and Olivia drove home in silence, and then the woman seemed to burst into tears. "My dear husband, you have always been with me in sorrow and in joy. I'm sure that you will be with me through this journey to the end. In the meantime, let's bring laughter, joy, and smiles back into our home. Let's raise all of our daughters in love and harmony." Christian and Olivia kept their word. They returned home revitalized. Happy streams flowed down their arms. The trees had already bent their branches, laden with large, fist-sized apples. In the vegetable garden, the unharvested potatoes were waiting for their time. Bright orange carrots nodded with lacy green. The ripe beetroots, grain to grain, fruit to fruit, what went into the cellar, what would go to the market. Barbara's parents had set themselves the goal of raising their daughters to be educated and honorable people, and they were stubbornly pursuing their dream without turning back. Barbara had already pressed the doorbell when the mobile phone rang in her purse. When she heard her husband's voice in the receiver, she immediately made her voice as mysterious as possible and whispered, "Calvin, I have a terrific surprise for you. You're going to have a sumptuous celebration dinner tonight," Wendy said. And the good news she wanted to tell. She needed something else nice to put her lover in a romantic mood beforehand. But Calvin said that he was busy, running to the skating rink, but by the appointed time will be sure. On the kitchen tiles on the floor, the mum-to-be glides like a waltz. Chicken with round potatoes around it into the oven. Red fish, which she loved immensely, into the frying pan. Now she will still put together a salad of fresh cucumbers, tomatoes with herbs and garlic, and the holiday dinner will be ready. For Calvin, a bottle of wine. For herself, a fan of a healthy lifestyle, sweet carbonated drinks. No, I'm gonna have to cut out the sugary drinks for now. Their baby didn't need that bubblegum chemistry. Barbara looked round the table once more, took out the brightly colored paper napkins she'd been saving for special occasions, set out the plates from the old porcelain set with gold ornaments. She stacked the massive forks and knives next to them. She had never been able to like all that fancy modern crockery, thin and clinking, made like twins, where similar sets were indistinguishable from each other. For dessert, there was good old Praga cake, which she had adored since childhood. Maybe she remembered it so well because their first family trip to the big city ended with a visit to a bakery, where everyone was bought a large sliced cake Prague, generously poured with chocolate icing. Since then, it had stuck in her memory that where that cake was, there was the happiness of serenity. Barbara twirled around the wardrobe, choosing an outfit for dinner. She wanted to impress her husband's imagination with the news of her pregnancy and her appearance. She was sure that in the aggregate everything would look like fireworks, would strike Calvin to the core, would touch his tender, loving heart. Her spouse did not deceive her expectations. At the appointed time, she heard the keys rattle in the keyhole and hurried to meet her soulmate. "Betty, you look fantastic," Calvin announced to her from the doorstep. "What kind of holiday are we having today?" "What are you all dressed up for?" Calvin asked. "Don't rush, darling, change first. Here are your house slippers." Calvin gradually changed, washed his hands, and went to the table. He thought to himself with annoyance, "I should have at least bought some flowers on the way." Was it for nothing that he had recently started working part-time in a reputable law firm? Now he always had some money. It was not all to ask his parents for pocket money. Of course they won't refuse, they don't count every penny. But independence is better than material dependence. Barbara put the salad on plates, took out a ruddy chicken from the oven, shyly glistening with its fried sides and a halo of golden potatoes. She made up her mind and blurted out, "My darling, I'm so happy. We're going to have a baby." Calvin immediately turned pale, and then his face turned red. He almost choked on his wine, and then asked fearfully, angrily and sharply, "Are you sure? Have you been to the doctor?" Barbara looked up at him in surprise and thought for the first time that she didn't appear to know this man or his reactions well. It's a shock. Calvin, meanwhile, came to his senses and unleashed a harsh, implacable monologue. "You've had enough. All the adventures you wanted. Pram, cot, porridge, sleepless nights. Have you thought about me? Am I ready to be a dad at 22? I told you to see a doctor and get yourself some reliable birth control. I don't need all this baby stuff here. If you're old enough, go and get an abortion." The young woman couldn't believe her ears. Her husband was saying all these words. Her always courteous, so gentle and attentive Calvin, with whom they had walked side by side until the leather wedding. As recently as 2 months ago, they celebrated their 3rd wedding anniversary. "Do whatever you want. I don't want this baby," he said flatly. "I hate to tell you, but I'm a big believer in the child-free movement. Do you remember the word child-free? That's my credo." "If you get rid of that baby, then we'll talk," Calvin said flatly. "In the meantime, I'm going outside to get some air. Your fancy news makes me feel a little sick. Barbara threw her things into her bag, shedding bitter tears. A thought ran through her mind. That's not my Calvin. It's like he's got a demon in him, making him say all those horrible words. I'll go to my parents for a while, come to my senses, share the good news with them, and he'll cool down and change his mind, she decided. Otherwise, how can I live with such a weight on my heart? I don't even want to think about what would happen if all this wasn't an accident, but a sudden collapse of my family happiness and my whole life. Calvin sat at the bar in a cozy drinking establishment and couldn't understand how he had found himself here. The subdued light streaming from the beautiful orange fixtures created a stunning, soulful atmosphere. None of the visitors made any noise, nor did they stand out in the general chorus of voices. There was a group of pretty girls sitting right next to Calvin, celebrating something in a small circle of women. Even they, who were clearly already tipsy, were having a lively conversation without attracting too much attention from the men. 200 grams of cognac, Calvin said to the bartender. And a slice of lemon without sugar, please. He drank the amber liquid in one gulp, as if intoxicated. Immediately he ordered another drink. He felt warm inside. He felt that his tongue could hardly move in his mouth. But he was suddenly so anxious to complain to someone that he started talking to the bartender. You see, Brother, Barbara and I have always been different. I've never been attracted to any girl before her. Just flings. And she's beautiful, hair black as pitch, eyes gray-green, penetrating as if she was looking through me. A luscious figure. The tipsy Calvin gathered his strength and continued his confession. One thing about her, I never understood what is the passion for these little creatures, always disturbing parents to live peacefully. What nonsense. Calvin was indignant. I want a child and she's driving me crazy with her dreams. At least God was merciful and didn't give us offspring for 3 years. And then I come home today and there's a festive table, wine, my wife all dressed up, eyes shining. I could have expected anything, but not such a sudden surprise from her. She's pregnant, you see. Did she ask me before baffling me with such a freeloader? A ringing silence hung over the table where the pretty girls were sitting with cocktails in their hands. All the girls at the hen party could hear every word Calvin said, and they began to whisper, wondering to whom of those present such words about children were addressed. Only to those who were careless and had no desire to procreate. And he himself would like to live carefree and carefree. The young ladies laughed at first, but then began to go home at once. The mood was ruined. Only May looked back at the impolite young man at the door. Handsome, you could make a film as a hero lover. He's a fool when he's drunk, she thought, and opened the front door sharply, catching up with her friends. The time was late. Barbara was sitting at the suburban railway station, where the last train was about to arrive. She hadn't seen Calvin come home drunk and hadn't even noticed the absence of her suitcase. Her husband collapsed on the bed and fell into a heavy sleep, not feeling guilty about the quarrel. Barbara called her father, who certainly wouldn't be surprised by her late arrival. Something had happened, then. Christian listened to her confused speech in silence, then answered meekly. I'll be waiting for you at the railway station, daughter. Be careful on the road. And I'll tell Mom that you missed us unexpectedly. Olivia listened outwardly calmly to her husband's news of Barbara's unexpected arrival, and did not let on that the news had caused her any serious concern. Closing the gate behind her husband's car, Olivia went round to see who was still under her parents' wing. Amanda and Bridget had been living with their husbands and children in different cities for years, wherever fate had thrown them. For them, Olivia was completely at ease. Just today, she'd been chatting to both of them on her mobile phone. 19-year-old Emma was tossing and turning in her sleep, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Florence was quiet and serene in the realm of Morpheus. In her 23 years, she was a sturdy girl with nerves of iron, the first helper in the house and garden for the not-so-vigorous and young Christian and Olivia. The woman lovingly stroked her youngest daughter's shoulder, smiling. My sunshine. Anna. There were no frowning clouds of unhappiness around the boy's neck among all the household. Their trip to Betty's witch doctor had a magical effect on the villagers. Before, they had all tried to pass them quickly. Suddenly Olivia, or Christian, would stop them in the street and say, I brought some goat's milk for Emma, but I've got enough. Where is it going? And you have a special girl. God bless her. At other times, someone would sneak in a bowl of strawberries, a bucket of May honey, or apricots under the wicket. If Olivia was carrying a girl in a wheelchair, no one would turn aside from their path. Then one day an unforeseen event happened. 2 yards away from the Christian family home lived another family with many children. They knew no grief, only there were boys growing up one after another. Their mother, Agnes, worked on a farm. Their father was a trucker. He drove cargo all over the vast country. No one could say how it happened that they went off and climbed up to the barn. After work, grandmother looked after them in the farm, but that time she lost sight of them. They managed to climb up to the high roof without any obstacles. But how to climb back down? They didn't think about it at the age of 3 or 5. Nothing sensible went into their heads. Jump down onto the straw, suggested the eldest of them. To his misfortune, the little one jumped down, and he fell unluckily on his back, breaking his still fragile spine. Agnes, who had come from the cows at the cries of the neighbors, picked the boy up and dragged him to the infirmary. But it was impossible to touch him with such an injury without qualified medical assistance on the spot. The young body eventually fused the broken bones in the wrong way. The boy remained somehow bent, and when he grew up a little, his legs stopped obeying for good. He was taken to the regional clinic, and the doctors there consulted with foreign doctors. The verdict was the same: it was impossible to help the boy. Now he would have to live like that until he was old. Agnes, in her 35 years, turned into an old woman in a flasher, and her husband's temples were thickly grayed. She would look at her son, sigh in silence, and then she would be off again. There was a sepulchral silence in the house. Not a laugh from the younger boys, not a groan from the most crippled child. It was as if everything had died out. And then one day Agnes came to Olivia's house to get a pair of scissors to trim the excess branches on the trees. And in the house, Emma was just sitting by the window with a book. She raised her bottomless brown eyes to Agnes and held out her hands to her. Agnes was surprised the girl came up, took her hand, and remained silent. And Agnes felt a warmth flowing through her veins and veins. Believe it or not, a heavy stone had fallen from the shoulders of the blameless mother. She looked at Emma carefully, thinking that this girl was not destined for a happy life either. And how kind and warm her face glowed. At home, Agnes immediately started cleaning, baked cakes, and read stories to the boys. She bathed the eldest, changed his clothes, and put him on a high bed with a mountain of pillows under his head. Now she had other thoughts in her head. Fate is hard on us. But my boy is alive and with me by my side. Time will tell how long we both have to live like this. But I will try to make him learn everything that his maimed body will allow him to do. Get the sadness out of the house. You will not break us, but the miraculous warmth, which can heal the soul and guide those on a positive path who do not see a way out of a difficult situation. The news soon spread throughout the village. Some ironically dismissed it, others decided to test her gift for themselves. Moreover, one gossip girl claimed that the girl was a sorceress, bringing her out into the open. And it turned out to be the other way around. When Emma stretched out her hands, which could give warmth and comfort, the woman was like an electric shock. And the girl's arms and legs began to twitch so violently that Olivia, who was sitting nearby, was frightened. "Little witch," shrieked Agnes, the experimenter. "You electrocuted me, you charlatan." Emma didn't say anything back. Olivia, on the other hand, was not confused. "That's how I knew I shouldn't have let you in the house. Her neighbor, how many people go to her house? It's never happened before." Her daughter, who had already arrived, stopped her. "Mum, don't. Everything is fine." The girl had never mastered long sentences, but it was always possible to understand her speech. Emma smiled briefly and took another look at the woman who had come for her warmth and added, "She won't come again." It was impossible to conceal any incident in a small village. The villagers believed even more now that Emma was a child with an extraordinary gift for soothing the heart and soul. Since then, her abilities have never been abused unnecessarily. And when they did, they always wanted to be near the sunny girl and soak up her positive energy. Olivia was distracted by the sound of a car pulling up to the house and hurried to meet Barbara and her husband on the doorstep. "Barbara, honey, it's so good to see you." Your eyes are tearful. Is something wrong, daughter? The woman quickly put the kettle on the cooker, took out from the shelf strawberry jam, vases with biscuits. By the way, why ask about something excited from the doorstep? Maybe their conversation won't be for men's ears. After getting everyone drunk on tea and sweets, Olivia sat down on the edge of the bed next to Emma. Shall we talk about the good stuff or leave it till morning? The morning is wiser, she asked. Barbara stretched happily under the warm cotton duvet, took her mother's hand, and whispered, I'll tell you all the details. Tomorrow, Mummy, I'll tell you the main thing. I'm having a baby. I am ready to go through any trials to make this baby come into the world. She said the last words almost through sleep, having time to think. I'm home. It's so nice here. Olivia smiled understandingly back at her daughter, but she couldn't see anything else. Here's another one of my blood, soon to be a mum herself. Life flows like a full-flowing river, past steep banks, past flowering meadows, past joys and troubles. One generation succeeds another. No one can stop these laws of being. May had been stirring the sugar in her coffee cup for 10 minutes now, monotonously passing the teaspoon round and round, not even noticing that the flavored drink had long since cooled down. She couldn't get that man in the bar and his words about not accepting children in the family out of her mind and was ready to announce it to the world. All the way back home, her girlfriends kept telling her he was wrong. Without a baby, a family will always be incomplete. Aren't infertile women the only ones who go out of their way to become mothers? May didn't share their enthusiasm. She liked to take a long look at herself in the mirror in the morning. When all the household had gone to work, she admired her perfect body without a single external flaw. And who needs this huge, ugly belly, turning a woman into a scarecrow, she thought. I could so easily have done without all this torment and ordeal. And who decided that motherhood is a woman's lot on this earth? Nonsense and nonsense. I may see my destiny in being the mate, or better still the wife, of a handsome man like the one I saw in the bar last night. To share his views. To live a life of pleasure together, just for ourselves, the ones we love. What's not a splendid plan for the rest of your life may said aloud. She had not, of course, announced such a manifesto to the girls yesterday. These friends are already dreaming of a full family with all the consequences that entails. I wonder if that man is a regular visitor to their favorite bar, or was he there by chance? I should go there more often in case our paths cross again, she pondered. After a cold coffee and a piece of cake, May hurried to the university. Her diploma defense was in a few months' time, and her thesis report had nothing in it yet. She was going to get an earful from her supervisor. At 7, Calvin was awakened by the insistent melody of his favorite song. The lead singer of the band, with a strained, squeaky voice, right next to his ear, kept repeating, "You hate." God, he thought, waking up with a hangover, I wish I hadn't learnt German at school and university. The obvious translation wouldn't have got on my nerves then. The song was his favorite track. That's why he put it on his phone to his mum's call, as he lovingly called the woman who brought him into the world. Calvin had a surprisingly warm relationship with his mother. If his father once chased him for negligence in studies and laziness in sports, sending the boy to the section almost from the age of 5, his mother always took pity on him and fulfilled any whim. He simply could not answer her call. "Honey, what's wrong?" Mum asked him right off the bat. "You both haven't picked up the phone since last night. Did you go out with your mates on a weekday? Or are you so busy with your books that your ears are filled with knowledge like cotton wool?" Calvin tried to reconstruct in his head the events of last night, starting with his arrival home. He walked through the rooms, looked in the kitchen. Barbara was nowhere to be found. It was clear that his wife hadn't been home last night. "Mum, I'll call you back," he said sharply into the phone. "I can't talk now. There's something I need to find out." In a few minutes, Calvin knew that together with Barbara, their suitcase, with which they had recently traveled to the sea, had disappeared from the flat. His wife Barbara's personal belongings in the wardrobe had also disappeared. There was no point in even thinking about it. The young woman could only have gone to her parents. Calvin brewed himself a cup of coffee, found last night's dinner in the fridge, ate a cold chicken, and thought about it. Then he dialed his mother's number and went on the offensive. "Can you imagine? My wife is going to have a baby. How does it happen in this position?" and asked interestedly. Did she fly in, or what? Was surprised by the potential grandmother on the other end of the line. Can you imagine? Calvin replied. It was an idiot's dream come true to have a screaming baby at my disposal. How can you be so rude? The woman raised her voice slightly. Son, in a normal family, a baby is a normal thing. A natural result of a man and a woman living together. But you, mother, don't start lecturing me now, he interrupted. I've already expressed my position on the matter. I offered her to terminate the pregnancy. But she's stubborn. She packed her bags and went to her parents in the suburbs. What am I supposed to do? Get on my knees? Talk her into coming home? His impassioned speech had no effect. His mother's response was merciless. You're going to clean yourself up right now. I can hear in your voice that you were pretty drunk last night. You're going to Barbara's parents, and you're bringing your pregnant wife home. Your father and I have always indulged your little foibles. We've spared you no expense, no effort. But I don't want my son to be a scoundrel, forcing his wife to run away from home when she's pregnant. Mum, but I don't want to become a father at 22, whimpered the misunderstood Calvin. This decision is final and cannot be appealed. His mother cut him off and pressed the disconnect button. Calvin realized that he was not even between hammer and anvil. On the other side of the barricade, where not only his wife but also his parents were the opposing side, he had no doubt that his father would also take his mother's side. With a frustrated sigh, Calvin headed for the shower. There was nothing to be done. He would have to go. He reached Barbara's hometown at about 3 in the morning. The day was slipping towards evening. The orange orb of the sun was slowly going to rest somewhere in the neighboring yards. Dogs barked, alarmed by its footsteps. It was as if the street had died out, though quite a few people had come out to the station with him. It was as if they had all vanished into thin air. There were no other villages nearby. A whole crowd got off the local bus with him. Many people knew him here, especially those who had enjoyed their wedding. They had celebrated it twice, so as not to offend anyone. First in the city, in a restaurant, in the circle of his parents' acquaintances, and then in the village, right in the yard to an old cassette recorder. And then, as usual, an accordion with folk songs. Calvin had never understood this rural tradition of inviting everyone to the table, but Barbara had told him straight away. A girl's wedding is her most important holiday. Even those young ladies who do not make a cult out of it dream of showing off in a white dress in front of many spectators, and I am no exception. Looking over the fence, Calvin noted that all his wife's family was at home. He'd have to confront his wife in front of witnesses. He pushed open the gate and froze. Olivia was looking at him from the window. He realized at once that she already knew about his quarrel with his wife. Yeah, well, there was nothing to do. He squared his shoulders and strode proudly to the porch. No one came out to meet him. He hesitated in the hallway, and then his wife appeared at the door with eyes full of vague hope. Maybe he's changed his mind, he'll apologize to her now, and everything will be as it was before. And then Calvin, instead of repenting, calming his beloved, saying that he had been wrong, had overreacted, froze in his tracks. It was as if demons were playing in him. He suddenly looked angrily at his wife and hissed. I thought about whether you and I need a child. My answer is still no. Barbara turned pale. Her thoughts were dashing feverishly. He's a stranger. He's a complete stranger to me. I'll carry the baby, I'll hide the baby. He will be mine alone. In the room beyond the wall, Christian and Olivia jumped at once at the sight of Emma convulsing in her chair. They were already aware of the scandal in Barbara's family, of course, but they decided to give the young people a chance to talk it over again. They stayed out of it for the time being. Emma was still hysterical, pointing out of the window, sobbing, whispering. It's bad. It's bad. It's bad. Christian jumped out into the yard just as Calvin grinned mockingly, spat contemptuously on the ground through his teeth, and shouted, 1 month I give you, wife, to dispose of this gift. It's either me or the baby. What happened next was like a slow-motion film from a melodrama. The father-in-law grabbed Calvin by the scruff of his jacket, pushed him out the gate, and said angrily, Don't you ever set foot here again, you lousy puppy. We'll raise our grandson or granddaughter ourselves without such a daddy. Don't you dare set your nose here again. What kind of puppy are you? Dogs are loyal creatures, and you, as I see it, have no idea what loyalty to a loved one is. Get out of here. Calvin stumbled to the bus stop to get to the railway station. It was getting dark. It was likely that the last train into town had already left, but he wasn't thinking about that right now. Trying on the empty platform, he negotiated with a local taxi driver. The good thing about money at his parents' expense was that he was not constrained. In town, Calvin decided to stop by that nice bar to drown his father-in-law's humiliation in brandy degrees. Nothing. He would somehow find common ground with his parents in this matter. They won't give up their only favorite son. Or would they still defend their decision? May did not meet the guy that night and went to a familiar bar alone, without any curious friends. What was her surprise when the young man walked into the bar in even more upset feelings? He went straight to the bar and ordered a large portion of cognac. He drained the glass in a gulp and looked round the room, which was almost empty before closing time. The time was approaching midnight. May didn't waste any time. When else would she get a chance like this? She put on the mask not of a femme fatale, but of a slightly sad girl puzzled by some problems of her own. She slowly approached the bar, smiled at the bartender as if with effort, and said, "I'm not having a good day today. Pour me something stronger, please. It may be unseemly for a lady to drink, but I don't have an ounce of socialite in me right now." Calvin turned round interestedly, thinking, "Someone else's current day has gone wrong. I'm not alone in my sadness," he said aloud. "Let's drink to all the good things together. There are good things." May pretended that she only noticed that she was not alone at the bar. She shook her ashy hair beautifully, opened her blue eyes wide with long, thick, black, skillfully painted lashes. "Come on, young man, where has our life been yet?" Calvin ordered a martini for the lady. For some reason, he was too shy to offer her a cognac. They talked about nothing. They had much in common in their preferences for cinema, music, and books. Both of them were quite educated, moderately intelligent, quite advanced people. Even the barman began to look at them with a sidelong glance. The establishment worked according to the system of service to the last visitor, and these two did nothing, completely dissolved in each other. He was already nervously, while they were talking, looking at them with the look of a faithful dog, which it was time to walk. And the glasses had to be polished 10 times over. It was no use. Calvin and May sipped slowly from their glasses. They were talking about something again, and even laughing. The bartender had given up hope of spending the rest of the night in his bed. And then the sweet couple suddenly got up and went somewhere quickly. He only heard the end of their conversation. The man happily said that he was going to order a taxi for the lady. And the lady told him that after such a heart-to-heart conversation, she would like to invite him to her place for a cup of coffee. That was quick. How did it work out for them, involuntarily thought the employee of the drinking establishment, locking the door behind the last customers. Why am I surprised, though? How many people come to our bar separately and then leave together? How does Pushkin put it? A cruel age, cruel hearts nowadays, everything is easy and simple. An age soft on morality, hearts easy on disposable love. I'm getting a little philosophical with fatigue. Home, hurry home, and go to bed. And Calvin was tenderly hugging his new acquaintance May by the shoulders in the back seat of some foreign car. He didn't even look at the model of the car out of joy. May's unexpected offer to continue the evening at her house threw him at first into some confusion, then encouraged him. Well, let Bridget be a mum-to-be. Other women are interested in me. Now I'll prove it to her and myself. That night was a vivid revelation to both of them. May, who had already had some experience, had never met such a man. Calvin, to his amazement, realized that intimacy with his wife, which had seemed a miracle to him, was far from sensual perfection. It was just before morning when they both collapsed powerlessly on the pillows. Satisfied with each other, they fell asleep almost simultaneously. Calvin only had time to think. Life's getting better. A couple of hours later, his happy mood was dampened by a call from his mother. "Calvin, I'm waiting for news. Are you home from Barbara's yet? My father and I are going to buy some sweets tonight and come over for tea. We'd like to congratulate our daughter-in-law on becoming a mom. It's a very exciting event for every woman. What time do you usually get home? From class. Calvin freed himself from May's embrace, who had fallen serenely asleep on his shoulder. Calvin looked around. His parents absolutely had to know nothing about him waking up in a strange bed with May. He would very much like to continue this wonderful companionship, but introducing her to his parents would be a wild thing to do. "Mum, don't worry," he said into the phone. "We had a productive talk with Barbara and her parents. Together we decided that it would be a good idea for her to stay with them a little longer. Autumn is pleasantly warm so far. The orchard is full of wonderful apples. The vitamins and fresh air won't hurt her mum-to-be. And in a week I'll go and pick her up and bring her home. We'll make up for it at university. It won't be a problem." Calvin couldn't even explain to himself why he had taken this time out from his mother. Maybe it would have been better to announce that their marriage to Barbara was over. They would each go their separate ways. But Calvin didn't dare give this information to his mother. This night had been too dreamy, too much to think about. May woke up and stretched sweetly like a contented, satisfied cat. Calvin didn't need to know that her parents had nurtured and cherished her always, like a fragile and delicate flower. Cultivated in her the notion that she was a princess, a girl who should know no worries or troubles. She never knew denial of any of her whims. For 3 years, she had been living in her own flat, which she was given after successfully completing her first year of university. She chose a purely female profession, economist. To be fair, there are also many economists among men, but May in this area imagined the male sex only in the position of chief financial officer, nothing less. And all these high regalia were not important. She wanted a man who was wealthy, handsome and intelligent, to be a colorful addition to him. Calvin seemed to her just such a promising option. She would do her best to find out more about his far-reaching plans for her life. The fact that the man was married, about to become a father, didn't bother May in the least. It was a warm and sunny autumn morning. Outside the window, a magical golden autumn reigned. She and Calvin were about to have coffee and pancakes. Yesterday she ran in and her mother left her daughter a whole container of ruddy, fried scones with cottage cheese, and then outside to walk through the rustling yellow dirty leaves. To breathe the pleasant air, filled with the last scents of autumn flowers still in bloom. To stop by some pastry shop, where they know how to make delicious little cakes with prefabricated cream, her favorite treat. Emma had been hysterical for several hours after Calvin's arrival. It was the first time it had happened. Christian and Olivia no longer knew how to calm their youngest daughter at the grocery shop near their home. Olivia met Agnes later that day. That first heartache patient who had once been so warmed by Emma's touch. The women got to talking. Agnes was very enthusiastic about meeting the young doctor who had traveled from the city to see their disabled son. "He is extraordinary," she said. "This young doctor specializes in the moral rehabilitation of young patients. A psychologist from God, he tries to make their lives more fulfilling, more lively, to adapt them to society." "And what methods does he use?" Olivia was immediately interested. "What do you think, neighbor? Maybe it makes sense to show him our Emma when he comes to visit you next time." "What he does and how he does it, I can't tell you," Agnes replied. "He talks to his charges in private. What I do know is that my son is always enthusiastic after his visits. His eyes shine with joy. He no longer feels so sad about his situation as a sedentary patient. Even on the street on his wheelchair now began to show up without undue strain. And recently Lucy, a young girl whose boyfriend died in the conscription service because of an accident, started to look in our house. She and my son would go to the bench outside the yard and talk about something for hours. Somehow I couldn't resist my curiosity." May listened to what Lucy was saying at the time. "I still can't get her words out of my head," she said to Olivia. "She was right," she said to Olivia. "What did she say?" Olivia couldn't resist asking. "I won't repeat it verbatim, but the general meaning was like this," Agnes explained. "God, I'm glad you're alive. If my beloved had come back from the service wounded and maimed, I would still be with him all the time that heaven has given us." The women were silent, immersed in thought. Only each of them was thinking to herself about her own misfortune. Each knew what her friend in misfortune was thinking now. There is nothing worse than looking at your child and knowing that he is doomed to a different life than the rest of the human race. Unbearable, they thought. Sometimes this hidden inner pain. Accepting it over time is possible. To accept it is hardly possible. Agnes promised Olivia that she would get a sensible doctor to see Emma next Tuesday, and so they parted. They both hurried home to their eternal chores. Agnes was not deceived. She had fulfilled her promise. On Tuesday, a handsome young man in his 30s knocked on Christian and Olivia's door. If the owners had been asked what his first impression was, they would have said with one voice, a good one. David was a pleasant, charming, intelligent doctor. He made it clear right away that he wanted to talk to his mom alone. And the girl herself didn't object in the least. They talked for over an hour, and then David agreed to have dinner with them. It was getting dusk outside the window. It was a good time to get together at a cozy table. David got to talking to Barbara. The woman herself did not realize how she had managed to tell him that she was pregnant and that she wanted the baby very much. But her husband did not approve of her decision to give birth. The doctor looked at her carefully and replied, "Men often come to maturity much later than women. Most think about it when they see the baby. Their paternal heart starts beating more frequently. But there is a certain category of gentlemen to whom children are only a hindrance in life. It's a waste of time to rehabilitate them," David concluded. After a delicious dinner, which David praised, Barbara volunteered to escort him to the bus stop. "I don't mind," said the nice doctor. "It would do you good in your condition. The bus stop isn't far. The lanterns in the village are working properly. Mums to be need fresh air like air." And he laughed at his joke without being embarrassed. "Tautology, Barbara," he explained. He was incredibly easy to be with. There was no need to think about what you wanted to say, no need to choose words, no need to be afraid of sensitive topics that affected her ego. This psychologist had clearly chosen his profession for a reason. Emma had not had a single tantrum during the week. Not once had she stomped her feet or thrown her toys. Barbara had met her soulmate. That was the impression David had left on her. David took the train into town and reminisced. Olivia hadn't misjudged his age. 6 months ago, he had been 30 years old. 15 of those years he'd spent making sure that people with disabilities, and congenital diseases smiled at the new day. Their family was considered a real medical dynasty. At the same time, they were not arrogant in the least. David's grandfather was a renowned geologist. His grandmother worked all her life as a nurse in a neurological dispensary. All 3 sons then followed in their footsteps. The eldest became an oncologist, the middle one a surgeon, the youngest a traumatologist. When the only son David was born in the family of the youngest, no one could think that he would want to become a professional psychologist. He loved her very much, his desk mate, his classmate, his childhood friend Sally. David had grown up to be such a tough kid, tall and broad-shouldered beyond his years. He was angular at first, and then he became stately. He and the new girl were put at the same desk in 5th grade. She was thin, a little pale, and very, in his terms, beautiful. Even a short haircut for a boy did not spoil it, on the contrary, made her huge gray eyes somehow very piercing, bottomless, a little pitiful. After a week, he started bringing bright yellow apples with small freckles for her from home. She loved them very much. Sally came from a broken home. Her mother got a job at school with the girl and worked as a cleaner. David and Sally's classmates tried to make barbs about the girl, but he stopped them so sharply and decisively that no one seriously began to mess with the tall boy. Sally didn't want to go to the costume New Year's Eve ball for the middle schoolers. Her mother didn't have the money for what she called a waste of money. So David brought her home for the first time, and he and her mother made Sally a costume of Maya the little bee from her favorite cartoon out of gauze, gold tinsel, and black paper. By the ornate Christmas tree on stage, when the costume contest was held, Sally's big eyes made a sensation. The main prize, for some reason a huge blue teddy bear, almost as big as Sally herself, was immediately handed to her by the head teacher. On the 8th of March, in the 6th form, David's mum bought a real Barbie doll for her son's friend. There was no limit to the envy of the girls in the class, but David and Sally had not been interested in all those envious glances for a long time. They walked to and from school holding hands. David was always the first to go to the cafeteria, and he took 2 glasses of tomato juice and sandwiches with Doctor's sausage. After a quick snack, they would run into the classroom to go over the assignment together. Both of them studied only for A's. Sally, petite and wearing a short-sleeved shirt, had become almost a full-fledged member of David's family. After school, they would go straight to his house, where lunch was waiting for them on the cooker. Warming up soup, mashed potatoes, or pilaf, they quickly demolished it all. In good weather, they would go for a little walk in the neighboring park. In cold and inclement weather, they would watch adventure films or fantasy on TV. Their views and taste matched in almost everything they did together. Sally's mom looked past their friendship. The perpetually tired woman had no time to check who her daughter was spending time with and how much time she was spending with them. No problems with her studies, that was fine. A terrible misfortune fell on Sally and David slowly, but rapidly. Once on another winter holiday they went, as usual, to the skating rink. Suddenly, a little figure skater, who skates very well, fainted right on the ice screaming with lights. David, who came up to her, somehow immediately realized that the matter was serious. He picked up the bee in his arms and dragged her to the medical center of the entertainment center, where the skating rink was located. A businesslike woman doctor from the ambulance dictated clearly teenage girl, 15 years old, I assume a heart attack. David went to the hospital with Sally. You should have seen the confused state he was in. The crew allowed him to take a reclining seat in the back of the car. On the way, he got everyone up on their feet: his grandfather, his father, his mother, his uncle. Half an hour later, everyone who could support David in his time of need had arrived at the hospital's emergency room. The diagnosis was devastating. A gray-haired cardiologist came out to them and announced that the girl had a neglected congenital heart defect. "Hadn't any of you doctors ever noticed that she might have had sudden blue lips? Weakness?" he asked. David stepped forward. "I spend whole days with her. There's never even been a hint that she has a health problem. She's ahead of the curve in PE. She rarely missed a class. She's on par with everyone else in class. What can I tell you, dear colleagues?" answered the cardiologist. "The girl seems to have a strong, courageous character. She naturally felt sick, but did not show it. Her ailing heart had weakened, and then there was the slightly delayed age of transition. If she'd had heart surgery as a child, she'd have forgotten about it long ago. We're going to rush her into surgery now, but only a miracle can save her." There was no miracle. Sally's heart stopped. 2 hours later, David's heart stopped right there on the operating table with it. And in the cemetery, among the wreaths of snow-white flowers, David's sturdy figure in a dark jacket seemed from afar like a rock, a monolith frozen by grief. Even those closest to him did not realize what he had put in the coffin for his faithful friend. It was a last gift, a sign of very great love and tenderness. The guy spent the whole day going around all the toy shops until he found a small but very colorful bee Maya in one of them. When the first clods of earth began to fall on the coffin lid, David walked to the edge of the grave and said, "I never got round to telling you that I love you. I was afraid you'd laugh, because we were only friends. I promise that I will devote my life to curing the deprived, unaccompanied hearts of longing. In your memory, my love. Without you, my world is empty." David kept his vow to his beloved friend, as they say, bulldozed into his studies after her death. He graduated from school with a silver medal, entered the medical university on a budget without problems. All his free time was spent with scientific literature of the medical field. Already in the 3rd year, I knew quite well the works of Carl Jung, Freud, Karlin, Korley, Zinchenko, Grigorenko, Kuzmina. He absorbed their thoughts and conclusions, judgments, sometimes not remembering to whom they originally belonged. But he absorbed everything in a row, as a sponge absorbs water. The boy was not a monk. He understood perfectly well that to keep himself in austerity is at least stupid. He was successful with his classmates, had brief flings, but no one managed to melt the ice in his heart. At first, such hot attempts in his address, many young ladies still undertook, but soon realized that this always a little gloomy young man is not believed in any female tricks. Why he behaved like that remained a mystery. His sad love story was known only to those closest to him. They were not going to talk about it. Then David had a long practice. He asked for a part-time job in the neurological dispensary, where his grandmother once worked. David assessed the situation soberly. Mentally ill people, and those who survived the tragedy, remaining mentally healthy but lost due to their grief. For society, these are two big differences. The public in the treatment center was diverse. For himself, he singled out a few cases where it seemed to him that mental illness was a natural extension of the immense grief of losing a loved one. Evelyn, 40, had been admitted to a neurological institution after she began wandering around the entryway dressed as a ghost. She could not accept that her beloved husband had been killed in a car crash. He came to her in sweet dreams almost every day, saying that he was near, just lives now in a parallel world. All she has to do is reach out her hand. Evelyn learned her lessons from her nocturnal visits with her husband and made herself a costume of an inhabitant of otherworldly worlds. Wore it when dusk fell. Then she looked for her soulmate outside the house, in the entrance, scaring the neighbors and passers-by. In the daytime, the woman became herself again, lived her usual withdrawn life quietly and peacefully. The respectable people did not approve of such night ghost phenomena. They wrote a report to the district police. Evelyn was taken to the dispensary quickly, and then she finally became despondent. Her husband stopped visiting her at night. She began to think seriously about leaving the world. So she would be more reliable, it seems, with him in that favorable, otherworldly world, and then her husband would be there again. The head doctor was rather skeptical about David's initiative to work with this woman. "Father, you've chosen a difficult case, both quiet and violent at the same time. We keep Evelyn on medication all the time. She sleeps all day long. I can't think of anything wrong with her. But I want to bring her back to a full life," objected the young specialist. "A beautiful woman, she was a businesswoman. But what has she turned into? We must make her happy again with summer sunshine, winter fluffy snow, autumn beauty of fallen colored leaves, and spring delicate aroma of mimosa sprigs." The old professor smirked and added an admonition only at the end of the dialogue. "Our basic principle is to do no harm. And remember, then act boldly." Evelyn was lying idly on the bed when David appeared in the ward. Her only advantage over many of the other patients was that her younger sister had arranged for her to have a separate apartment with cozy furnishings, a large television set, and bouquets of fresh flowers in elegant vases. You wouldn't know it was a hospital. It had a homely atmosphere. David had no plan to bring the woman out of her deepest stress. He stared at the pretty patient in silence for a moment, then suddenly decided to sit down and tell her about his personal experience. In the middle of his monologue, Evelyn changed her position and turned round to face him. At the end, she asked him a question in a muffled voice. "And how did you, doctor, manage to cope with the inner emptiness and acute loneliness?" David, without hesitation, said, "I decided to dedicate myself to people who were also in the midst of hopelessness." "I love my dog," Evelyn suddenly said, "but I can't afford to have a friend at home. My business involves constant traveling. I won't be in treatment forever." David had an idea. "You know, Evelyn, my close friend Christian runs a dog shelter with his parents. I'll talk to your doctor today. Maybe he'll let you and I go there together." The woman smiled miserably. "I'll be grateful to you, David, and I promise I won't make any more attempts to collect more pills, to drink them all at once. When you're alone with a big grief, people around you are just as serene. It starts to feel like you've been dealt such a terrible fate. Your story showed me that there is a lot of grief around. It's just that people live in it like a tough shell, not showing the world what hell is going on inside them." A fortnight later, Evelyn was discharged from the dispensary. During this time, they had already made 2 trips with David to the shelter, where the woman couldn't resist taking home a large Labrador puppy. "You know, David," she shared with her handler on the way back, "I've decided to make a radical change in my life. I'm no longer attracted to my cosmetics business. I've already offered to buy out my salon chain to a longtime competitor. I'm sure she won't miss this chance to get her hands on a place that's popular with women. And I got the idea to set up my own kennel. I want to breed pedigree Labradors, to give people the joy of communication with these wonderful dogs." The head doctor of the dispensary congratulated David on his first victory. He added that almost every ward of the medical center needs such a soulful, individual approach. How many destinies, broken lives can be redirected with simple words? What new horizons can a person who believes in himself again reach? He pondered aloud. Then there were many young and old who were able to accept grief and move on, and those who were never able to come to terms with the misfortune that had befallen them. David's tactics were always the same. He tried to reliably switch the person to something very important, very interesting, to leave no chance to get off the new path. There were failures in his work, but on the whole, the method worked amazingly well. A mother who lost her son and fell into a deep depression, he arranged to volunteer in an orphanage. A lonely old maid who had long ago lost hope for personal happiness after the death of her mother was assigned as an apprentice to a master in men's haircuts. A year later, she met in the salon with a single father with 2 children. Now she lives happily ever after. That's how David walked through life, helping those suffering to get rid of the oppression of circumstances without looking back. At first, he treated Barbara and Emma with condescension, taking them for just another unattached, but spoilt young ladies who had had a lot of injustice in their lives. Barbara shuddered with fear for a long time, and if someone knocked on the gate, she waited for Calvin's remorse and forgiveness. Then she decided to go to correspondence school. The once burning desire to study classical English literature somehow subsided. Later, David generally convinced her that with such a love for children from her will be an excellent teacher of Russian language and literature. After her maternity leave, he advised her to change her specialization and devote herself to pedagogy. Emma, and Dave, as she called him briefly, was also very fond of him. With his help, she learned to get out of her wheelchair and back into it easily, and to move around the house and garden a little on her own. However, she still preferred her mentor to be somewhere near her. Barbara's belly had already rounded up considerably. She was a couple of months away from giving birth. Winter was over, with all its long, magical holidays. Spring was blooming with the blossoming of fruit trees. The day was getting longer and the nights seemed shorter. David found himself looking forward to Tuesday more and more often. He couldn't wait to see Barbara again. Suddenly, he found himself watching her as she poured his coffee, sliced apples for jam, and did her simple hairdo. This young woman seemed so cozy and homely to him. At times, Barbara would fall silent, as if listening to herself, trying to determine what her long-awaited baby was doing. Then her face would always light up with a smile, and David would avert his eyes in embarrassment, thinking that she looked like Madonna, as innocent and perfect. After a while, the man realized it had happened. He had fallen in love again with Barbara, who was due to give birth in a couple of weeks. He didn't share his feelings. This young woman had already gone through the betrayal of a loved one and was able to overcome it honorably. But David was not sure that in Barbara's soul there was no hope that her husband would come at least to meet her from the maternity hospital to see her son. The ultrasound had long ago revealed that Barbara was having a boy, and she hoped he would mellow out and want to be near his family. Calvin hadn't shown up once in all this time. Only his parents came to visit with an unexpected offer to sell the flat and return the money invested in it to Barbara's parents. The boy would have to be raised, brought up, educated. The mother-in-law considered her decision wise and logical. Barbara herself remained silent during this conversation. David was right, she still hoped in her heart that time could be turned back. Despite the fact that, according to her mother-in-law, Calvin was already living with another woman. She knew her husband well. He'd made a mistake, fallen for some other woman. She's pregnant, not so attractive now. Vain hopes, vain tears in the pillow at night, a woman's loneliness. Calvin lived for his own pleasure, barely remembering his family. Calvin and May initially hid their relationship from the man's parents for a long time. At his request, May pursued with persistence the cherished goal of winding up and marrying Calvin. She sat by his side when he needed to do his studies. Although she was a year older, May successfully defended her degree and got a job as an aspiring economist in a small firm. Calvin passed the session, moved to the final year, became a good employee in a law firm, where he recently got a part-time job. Now he was an assistant lawyer on family cases there on full rights of a staff member. In the law firm, no one guessed that career success clever Calvin was due to a quiet, modest, but clearly talented guy who came to the lawyers to practice. The newcomer had a phenomenal instinct for successful, profitable deals. He did not get involved in the cases himself, but a couple of times hinted to Calvin for which divorce proceedings should be taken up and which litigation companies to join. Having already won twice in complex litigation, Calvin suggested to the chief the best line of behavior. He was going to take his new girlfriend May somewhere in Turkey, Tunisia, or Egypt. Suddenly, he was shocked to hear from his own mum. "Son, I turned a blind eye to your relationship with May. I thought you would come to your senses and think about it. But my hopes were not fulfilled. There's not much time left before our grandson is born. Father and I don't want to be mean and greedy people. I'll give you a week to vacate the flat. We'll sell it. It is decided to give all the money to your wife to support the boy." Looking ahead, we can tell you that Calvin's conscience about welcoming his wife and son from the maternity hospital did not even think of waking up. On the day of the birth of his child, he slept serenely at home. The holidays after the session were in full swing. Then he went to the supermarket to buy a couple of bottles of wine for dinner. That evening, Calvin had his first nervous conversation with May. She was so used to living in a spacious two-bedroom flat that she didn't want to move the two of them into her studio flat. From here, her work was within walking distance. The infrastructure here wasn't the same as near her own flat on the outskirts. Another ultimatum appeared in Calvin's piggy bank. "We've been together for over 6 months, honey. It's time to make a decision. What are your plans for me? If we are to have a real family, not just a cozy pastime, you will take responsibility and provide your woman with both a place to live and means to live. Exactly a trouble-free existence." The man was at first a little taken aback by such a statement, but then he remembered a busy conversation with a talented trainee. In his mind, he instantly conceived a plan to earn a decent sum of money for at least a year of the life to which May was accustomed. He could no longer do without this resourceful person, hot, beautiful companion at all the parties in their youth group, surprisingly even sometimes a good hostess. Calvin had no way of knowing that May's friend's cleaning company did the cleaning in his flat, and that the pickles in the fridge came from orders placed at cafes and restaurants. "There will be a beautiful life for you, and there will be prosperity," Calvin proudly replied to his friend. Inappropriately recalling the children's poem "The Old Man," which his mother liked to read to him before bedtime, Calvin said, "I have a plan. I'm sure it will work." May's gratitude gave Calvin even more confidence that the plan would go well. The next day, he didn't go to work, he ran there. Calvin's plan was simple. Yesterday, stammering, blushing and pale, an intern had told him that a client had made him an indecent proposal. Calvin had thought at first that the customer's outburst was of a different nature, but it turned out to be otherwise. The client offered the guy to steal one of the documents in the case of divorce proceedings with his wife. Deprived of such a strong argument, the woman was losing everything. The proud young employee rejected the offer with indignation. And Calvin decided to take advantage of it. Contacting the unscrupulous mate was easy. All his contacts were on file, as they should be. Calvin set up a meeting with the slippery fellow in a cafe on the other side of town. He did the deed. Then it was over. Inexperienced in such matters, the employee of the law firm did not take into account only one nuance: the wife of the scoundrel was not a bad guy either. She has long ago hired a private investigator who constantly monitored the movements of almost ex-spouse. Further could unfold a fascinating story. The offended woman was like a wildcat. She appeared in front of the spouse at the moment of the exchange. Angered by the perfidy, the wife did not come alone, but with the press, and in the evening stories about the corruption of the lawyer's world were shown on all the local news channels. Calvin's name was instantly blacklisted from all legal services. To get a job in his profession, he could now only somewhere in Zimbabwe, and even then unlikely. Calvin's parents raised all their connections, trying to hush up a criminal case on several articles at once. Calvin was facing serious charges. He didn't get away with it. Given the large size of the reward, the court sentenced him to 2 years imprisonment in a penal colony with a substantial fine. May, who had unwittingly inspired Calvin's aspirations to get a lot of things at once, vanished from his flat in an instant. Ubiquitous journalists quickly found the girlfriend of the hero of the day, but she refused to comment, muttering a pre-prepared phrase. No comment. Barbara learned about what happened to her husband much later from his parents, who brought money and gifts for their recently born grandson. Named Christian after his grandfather, the baby never learned that his birth father had not wanted him before he was born, and later ended up in prison for dishonest intentions to enrich himself without labor. On the day that little Christian was born, Barbara was driven to the hospital in a car David had recently acquired in an amazing way. The doctor had an almost fantastic story with this car. He lived in average conditions, wrote his PhD thesis, worked extensively with patients in the city and region, but never charged inflated fees for his appointments. Everything according to the price list of the clinic. Once a very old grandmother from a distant village turned to him. Her grandson was a biker and had crashed his motorbike. The old woman could not forgive herself that God had taken him young and left her, the owner of the gorgeous flower beds. The flowers were still growing and blooming, but her own child was gone. It took David more than one session with Granny and the gardener to turn her attention back to the flowers that needed care. The last time he was about to leave for the train, Grandma stopped him. "Son, wait. I have one more thing to do for you. Hold the paper. You read it carefully." David's eyes widened when he saw the contents of the document on letterhead with watermarks. It was a gift deed in his name for a blue BMW car. "Yeah, no," David said, embarrassed by this. David bought it from his grandmother, who and her grandson lived alone in the whole wide world. He's a loner. "I'm an old lady, God's dandelion. His parents died. I brought him up. He is late, they had a child. They all traveled around the world to Elbrus, and in their box traveled. My grandson wasn't poor, he was a businessman. This is his car, just for the parade. He used it. All on this iron friend of his, until it ruined him. You use it, son. I had a neighborhood officer help me with the paperwork. It's all according to the law." And that's how Dr. David got a shiny blue car. After the discharge, Barbara was welcomed by the whole team. Amanda, Bridget, and her family came to the village to celebrate the occasion. Christian, Olivia, and Emma stood with large bouquets of flowers. And David held a cake for the staff and a bundle of colorful inflatable balloons. Barbara froze with a bundle with a baby in her arms and admired him fondly against the clear azure sky. He looked very cute in his new light-colored shirt with the collar open. Suddenly, one of the red balloons, painted with hearts, burst with a deafening sound. Barbara laughed and suddenly realized that she no longer loved her husband Calvin. The magic was over. The last illusions melted away. After serving his sentence, Calvin returned to the city. He did not like to talk about his stay in prison. On all questions, parents answered sparingly. He was now legally unable to get a job as a lawyer. May changed her phone number. Through mutual acquaintances, he learned that she was about to marry some fashion designer with great prospects. Emma was upbeat. She had long ago disproved the doctor's assumptions that she was destined for a short life. The villagers still came to her to look into her kind eyes and believe in a bright future. She paid attention to everyone. She was still the sunny little girl that Betty the witch doctor saw in her. David and Barbara had a daughter, Megan, a year ago. There was no other name for her, her parents had decided. Dr. David has finally moved to the village, settling into his inpatient office. Now people from both the city and the region were coming to see him. Calvin carefully washed a window in the restaurant, fulfilling the task of the cleaning company, which he miraculously managed to get a job in. A chance meeting with May's friend, who had been in the cleaning business for a long time, had helped. This young lady was once very jealous of May and had a little crush on her handsome boyfriend. Now Calvin has already lost his former gloss, has become somehow vague and shabby. A woman's heart is not made of stone. The owner of the cleaning company really needed a tall, strong worker, not afraid of heights. Her female employees were afraid of working at heights. Word of mouth, she offered Calvin the vacant position. He enthusiastically accepted. I must say, he was surprisingly fast and high quality, as if he was born for this job. Now the man in overalls, carefully rubbing the shiny surface with a special compound, began to rub the formed deposit of thick white foam over the entire area of the glass. A blue foreign car pulled up in front of the restaurant. An imposing man came out of the saloon, holding the hand of a boy of about 3 or 4 years old. Next to him, a lovely woman with a little girl in a beautiful dress in her arms stood proudly. Calvin couldn't believe his eyes at first. It was his ex-wife Barbara, but so charming, full of aristocratic dignity. And when he thought, we have English roots, hence the lords and ladies. Misty Albion. No wonder he splashed the foam on the glass once more. endeavoring to rub the surface of it to an incredible luster. It seemed to him now that this was his way of washing his tangled soul. He had once dropped his dignity, his happiness, and his future to the ground. Would he be able to pick it up?